Hello everybody, this is Chance Paladin, and welcome to another installation of Chance Paladin Narrates a Story, written by Chance Paladin. This book is narrated in front of a live streaming audience. Nothing in these books are medical, dental, vision, legal, moral, ethical, or otherwise instructions on how to do anything. Read at your own risk and responsibility. This is book number 12 of Rats and Locusts. And some legalese. All rights reserved. No portion of this book may be reproduced in any form without permission from the author except as permitted by U.S. copyright law. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead and actual events are purely coincidental. Content advisory is as follows. I write post-apocalypse stories, therefore portions of these stories are intended for mature audiences. There's about as much romance as you would expect in a typical post-apocalypse scenario. Explicit sexual acts were included or germane to the story, not intended to be gratuitous or fetishized. There isn't really any hard swearing worse than what you hear on cable. There's a moderate range of violence as would be expected in a post-apocalypse story. However, the suffering aspects are not deliberately glamorized or embellished upon. So with that, let's get started. Forward. Someone asked me how the cities got so bad. It's an easy answer. The progressives, aka regressives, like to control and be controlled. They like to be told what to do. They like every facet of their being under an illusion of choice and diversity. Constantly happy as long as someone else is a class underneath them to pity on is needed. They all conglomerated in a place where they could do that easily, the city. All the moderates didn't like being told what to do, so they moved away. If moderates don't like something, they simply won't do it. Progressives, on the other hand, if they don't like something, they force that decision on everybody. They can usually be caught soon after not following their own bizarre rules. The dichotomy pushes each side further and further away and mashes the progressives closer and closer together. They huddle in place like cattle, waiting for the next leader to go let them know when to eat and sleep, all the while their money is being stolen out from under them. They are dividing and unifying at micro levels, eating and providing to each other like a self-sustaining symbiotic virus. Chapter 1. Fun and Games. Class Stronghold, 3 years and 6 months after the collapse. Early summer. There was a cat walking around the stronghold outside with a youngling rodent in its mouth. Nobody could get the rodent away from the cat, and the cat was quite proud of itself. It wouldn't put the rodent down, though. The cat had to parade it around the farm to let everyone and everything know in the area what had happened. Before the cat can complete its parade of pip-squeak screaming, the mouse expired. The cat, not fully satisfied, tossed it aside to try to find a new one. The cat knew these were dirty and needed to be left on the outskirts of the farm so they didn't infect anybody the cats were sworn to protect. The kids were horrified when they came into class, not knowing what was going on for the strange event. I told them I had the perfect story to put it into context. The story of Ricky, under the city, 2 months earlier, dawn, spring. Chapter 2, Too Early. It was time for Ricky to get up. He knew this because he felt gnawing at his toes. Ricky opened one eye, then the other, then wiggled his toes to stop the gnawing. He said to himself in his mind, "I'm not dead yet." He heard the claws scurry away, heard some chattering in his ear, and fumbled to his feet. It was cold, but all the rags he wore kept him warm throughout the cold and breezy nights. Ricky was below average in height, and not at all handsome by current society standards. Maybe that's why a long time ago he decided to start living in the sewers. He never noticed the electricity go out, or everyone whining and starving. It had been life as usual for him. The rats had said something about a collapse, but he didn't really know what that meant. Life had collapsed for him long before the rest of society's had. That was until today, one day when everything changed. He had been in the normal process the last few days of doing his normal thing down in the sewers, which was working on his subterranean hideouts with his limited welding skills and scavenged metal, when something happened. He looked up at a drain and noticed it was raining in the city. There was always water dripping down because it rained 9 months out of the year, but this time it was different. It reminded him of something, like someone was pouring a 5-gallon bucket of water down the drain, except it didn't stop with 5 gallons. 5 gallons turned to 10, 10 turned into 100, and it didn't stop. Ricky was currently residing at the lower end of the sewers, closer to the ocean. The cool and clean ocean air blew in and kept it somewhat refreshing and tolerable. He felt something in his leg again, and an unusually large rat jumped onto his shoe and held onto his leg. It chattered at him. Ricky walked down to the end of the sewer where some light shined down on some planter boxes he had where some partial sun could shine on them. It was growing lavender and the rain came down then drained. It both filtered the water so it was drinkable and made it to where his lavender garden wouldn't get soggy. Something tugged at Ricky's nerves again. This wasn't right. A voice in his head was telling him that something was wrong and he had to leave. Ricky looked around and all the rats were leaving. It was time for Ricky to leave as well. Ricky took as much of the processed lavender and stuffed it in his pockets of his smaller pants. Oh, no, off his smaller plants. Then he grabbed his biggest and strongest potted lavender bush and threw his pack on and followed the rats. As he scurried with the rats, he realized he hadn't heard vehicles in a while. Maybe months? Years? He wasn't sure why he was finally wondering this now. Maybe he'd been so at peace that he forgot down here with the rats. Ricky didn't feel at peace now, though. Maybe he'd heard some cars in the last few months, albeit briefly. As he ran by his meager greenhouse, which was getting his shade-friendly crops ready for the soon warmer days, he had to pass right by them. He barely had time to grab his heirloom seed bags that he'd been working on, as Ricky noticed the rats picking up pace. They ran and they ran, up an incline and to the left, up another incline and to the right. Ricky looked down in the ditches to see the water rushing by faster than he'd ever seen it, and it was getting higher. Ricky'd never seen the water that high before, and it was as if an entire lake was trying to cram through his tiny area at once. Ricky passed the main pipes leading to his area as they all but exploded with water. He climbed about 12 feet a ladder and watched as uncountable gallons of water rushed through. The sound was deafening. He had to be careful to climb the ladder with his moderately sized lavender plant, but was able to manage it safely as the water rushed below. Ricky sat on his new perch, as his memory rebounded, realization that there was no longer a rat on his shoe. Ricky looked around desperately but couldn't find his friend. Then Ricky heard squeaking next to his ear and saw the rat had managed to hang on through the scurrying and ladder climbing so his buddy was safe. Yeah, that was a close one. What's going on? More chattering. Yeah, I'm hungry too. I guess we'll try to wait this out. Ricky rummaged around in the shadows and opened up a steel container that was buried under rags, a little down the raised portion of the sewer that he was on. It had been a service box before, but he repurposed it to store food. Inside were many cases of MREs. Ricky had ready-to-eat food hidden all throughout the sewers. He hadn't touched this one in ages and was glad it was still here. Ricky grabbed a random MRE and shut the hatch before anything could get in, then covered it back up with the rags. He took some lavender out of his pocket and mashed it over the rags to keep the bugs off. He took another handful out of his pocket, mashed it up, and rubbed it all over the filthy rags he was wearing. It made him smell good. He took a moment to reach out with his senses and felt no bugs. Ricky smiled and opened up his MRE. Ricky and his little buddies shared the MRE for about half an hour. There was no easing of the water pressure down below. This is insane, worse than even that big storm a few years back. The rat chattered in his ear. Something else, you say? More chattering. Ricky stared down at the water rushing by, his mind completely blank. An unknown amount of time passed before Ricky snapped out of it. Ricky knew there was nowhere to get from where he was to the unflooded part of the sewer. If any part of it actually remained unflooded, he mentally pictured the entire area in his head, and every point was a dead end or went down into rushing water. There was only one place to go, and that was up. Ricky opened up the sewer maintenance box one more time, pulled out the MREs, and stuffed them in his satchel. He always had concealed on the side. It would be enough food for a few days, hopefully enough for the water to lower so he could try to figure out how to fix his now flooded home. He closed the box again, now empty, and proceeded to make his final climb up to city level. Chapter 3, The Rain is Real. Street level, morning, day 1. With a gentle and silent move of a sewer lid, Ricky saw it was pouring, like the sky was flooding on them. No people were outside, it was only Ricky and the rats. They were all street level now as well, heading a certain direction. Ricky quietly replaced the sewer lid, his muscles barely straining, and then followed the rats. Well, they must know where to go. As he began to walk, he felt a tug on his shoulder. His large friend was holding on with strong arms and claws, Ricky's boonie hat protecting both of them from the sheer dump of water coming down from the sky. This isn't a storm like before, no. All of the clouds are backed up, unable to proceed. Lots of clouds. Cloud fuel, maybe. Ricky sniffed, and the air smelled amazing and clean. Not because he'd been in a sewer. The air felt rich, like there was so many plants in the surrounding area were producing oxygen that it powered the ecosystem with more than it was used to having. The oxygen from the plants works its way up into the hydrogen producing ocean and non-stop floods until a balance was reached. Ocean was absorbing hydrogen for so long. Now it was all finally getting let go. Definitely time to leave for a while. No safe place here for me. Ricky followed the rats toward the edge of the city and up a hill and saw them all funneling into a building. It looked like it got bombed out or something had exploded inside of it. Due to the missing bits, he couldn't tell if it was a building or a warehouse or a huge mansion. Ricky couldn't tell which, or maybe it was a bit of all three. He squeezed inside 2 pieces of the wall he found. He was able to fit with the benefit of his stature and finally found relief from the rain. A piece of the ceiling of the first floor remained intact above him. The other rats disappeared, presumably finding shadows or a quiet sealed basement to go into. Dilapidated, old building, morning, day 1. Ricky felt a negative presence, but it was faint. A rat whispered into his ear. An evil once resided here, but no more. Ricky nodded. He wouldn't start a fire, it would draw too much attention. He was still dry from all the oiled rags that he wore. As his body gave off heat, the rags breathed, and all the water began to evaporate. It left a calming chamomile and lavender aroma. He knew his clothes would be completely dry in a few minutes if he stayed here. At some point in history, Ricky had scored a bag of wildflowers. He surmised that they had been cast aside due to not having any valuable food-producing components. Everyone was wrong about mistaking the bag's value, however, because he had put some of the seeds in each of his lavender planters. Fairly often now, chamomile would randomly sprout, which was easily processed and helped ease his skin lesions and helped him remain calm and clear-headed. He looked down at his pot, and a few chamomiles were in there, and that made Ricky smile. As Ricky sat huddled in the corner of this wreck of a building, he thought of how much he had appreciated the rats. The rats had shown him how to maneuver the sewers so long ago. The rats had shown him the caches of MREs those Russian mercenaries had hidden down here, and now the rats had saved him from this flood that surely would have washed him out to the ocean. The big rat nuzzled around Ricky's neck to warm up, then whispered to Ricky, "We have to go?" It was still draining the sky in liquid form. They found a place below? Ricky looked around as his eyes acclimated to the dark, a sort of infravision taking effect that he had gained spending so long in the dark. He rummaged around and saw where the rat had been talking about. In one of the corners was a vault door that came open. The rats were all saying, "There's a passage here, there's a passage here." Ricky heard people outside suddenly get close. Something had been reported in the area. Ricky reached down to the vault door and grabbed the wheel. It protested for a moment as Ricky tried with a moderate amount of strength. Ricky upped the torque as he flexed and the door opened. As the half of rats on his side streamed in to meet with the other half of the rats waiting, Ricky opened the blast door enough for himself and his lavender potted plant. He then grabbed his lavender plant and scuttled down the hatch. as a small group of city defense forces walked by on patrol. They remained apparently unaware of the vault door gently closing in the pouring rain. Chapter 5. Dark Salvation, Safe Room, Morning, Day 1. Ricky didn't know who they were, but had heard bad stories from the rat chatter. They didn't take kindly to anyone who appeared houseless. The city was never friendly to the houseless. They also weren't kind to the rats. Apparently they would kill and eat the rats when the opportunity provided itself. I could have taken them, Mortimer, the rat retorted. The now army of rats had scurried off to check the surroundings. They were absolutely positive there was a way through here. They were repeating it so much it was starting to make Ricky's head hurt, as if he had to help. Fine. If you say there were more of them, we sure don't want to stir a fuss. Let's take a look down here. It was some kind of safe room or monitoring center. Ricky looked around. It was all long since dead. Power has been out for a while, I guess, the rat affirmed. So the collapse was pretty bad then? The rat sighed. They couldn't even survive a partial collapse? Ricky asked rhetorically, only half survived. The rat ignored him. Only half surprised. The rat ignored him. Oh well, so what did you find in here? No response from his rat friend. All he heard from the rat collective was, there must be something down here, some way through. We know there is. Ricky started looking around more. It was pitch black in here, but he was still able to see everything taking a sort of gray-red hue. It was some sort of safe room. It was possibly set up like a last stand location, except nobody had made a last stand down here. A bunker, but a terrible one, if there was no other way out. He never built a safe room with only one way out. Ricky helped the rats look around. Ricky felt and looked around for a little bit and found a tactical pump shotgun, much to his surprise. You guys told me they outlawed firearms ages ago. The rat responded, only outlaws had firearms. Ricky nodded and searched the shotgun for traps, but there didn't appear to be any. The mercs had left weapon caches in the sewers, and they'd all been trapped. Rather than try to disarm the complex system with his fumble fingers, Ricky dumped all the weapons into the sewer rivers. Mostly. Thankfully, the food hadn't been trapped. The dumping of the weapons was unfortunate, but had an unlikely bonus. The mercs got in a fight with the city over whether the weapons went, and a battle ensued, and the mercs got expunged. Ricky had asked the rats what they meant by expunged, but they offered no further details. That was simply how the story went. From what Ricky had been able to piece together, the mercs must have thought that the city-state leadership absorbed the firearms to augment their own firepower and leverage over the mercs. The city wouldn't confirm or deny it, offering no transparency, which fueled the rumors. Either way, it had screwed over Ricky getting any resupplies of their food. They probably would have noticed the food slowly diminishing if the gun thing hadn't happened anyway. Ricky smiled to himself. It was a good plan. He didn't even mean to do, and gave him some time to grow his own food, but now here he was. Apparently everything was temporary. The rats wouldn't stop repeating that there must be another entryway. Ricky had to clear his thoughts and grabbed the tactical shotgun from the wall. It had a balanced weight to it, but was empty. It had a sling with spots for shells. It was similar to the merc's firearms, but different. There's been a hodgepodge of different brands and models, and this one was very specific. Looked like a military design based on the safety and reinforced trigger guard. It had a strange shine to it, like it had a marine coating. The barrel and tube were both full-length, allowing full 8 rounds of 2 3/4 shells inside. An extra could go in the chamber, of course, and the top was tapped for an installed side saddle that allowed several more rounds easily at one's disposal. Behind the trigger guard was a pistol grip, which segued into a Gen 3 buttstock that reduced recoil from even magnum loads to basically nothing. That allowed follow-up shots ridiculously fast. Ricky vaguely recalled that this model could also accept 3-inch shells, which made the model very versatile. For sights, it had a ghost ring that was on the upper and had matching sights at the end of the barrel on a free-floating barrel shroud. The bore access was amazing, and Ricky wouldn't need a flashlight to use this anyway. Ricky flipped it over, hit the slide release, and racked the slide quietly to see if it was empty and also check its function. The mechanical sounded crisp and clear, despite the years being down here. The marine coating kept it solid from rust and had been well oiled before. It was empty, though. Ricky would need to find ammo for this room-clearing masterpiece. The sound of the shotgun slide racking hushed the working rats to a lower level of frenzy as they clawed and chewed on everything they can. It allowed Ricky to think a little bit more and hear clearly. They must have kept shells in here somewhere. A small portion of the rats broke off to immediately attend to the new task. Shells, yes. We smell powder. We will start looking. Ricky put the sling around him, adjusted the slack a little bit, and folded it under some of his rags. Ricky then listened carefully as a second set of digging and rustling started, but he heard something else as well, something above them in the room they recently were. He heard the rain showering down, but he also heard footsteps. Apparently the team had circled back and were adamant on finding him. Maybe they were bored, or maybe he was a higher priority than he thought. Someone must have seen him and alerted them. Ricky went back to the stairs and carefully ascended to where he had shut the latch and closed it as tight as he could with the wheel. The electronic bolt locks had disengaged a long time ago. They could get through this if enough of them were strong enough or knew how to use leverage with a crowbar to budge it. He listened down to the rats, and they were all still whispering about their tasks, some given by him and some instructional and instinctual and self-driven. Ricky put his ear to the door and heard the security team pattern out. There were more than before, twice as many. Ricky would have risked an open battle with 3 of them, but now with 6 it would be a bad trade and he'd be unlikely to survive. He was trapped with nowhere to go. His worst fear. It didn't take long for the team to find the vault door in the floor and start trying to figure it out. Ricky heard voices clearly. Found a vault door in the floor. Must be some kind of spy. You never know. We've executed 3 spies this month and are still no closer to finding out. So many talking at the same time, Ricky couldn't make out all the conversations. Either way, we have to get this open. Alright, Ricky couldn't follow any single conversation for long. Either way, we have to get this open. This is where that big corporate bigwig was hiding out when the place blew up 6 months or so ago. The one running those experiments, yeah. We still don't even know who did this one. It was an accident, right? Doubtful given what we've seen recently. Stop the chatter, this could be the spy we're looking for. Ricky felt them trying to budge the vault wheel, but were unable to. Ricky rolled his eyes as they all cycled through trying to turn it. None of them were singularly strong enough, all trying to display feeble attempts at machismo. Betas will be betas, Ricky reminded himself in his head. In the background, the rat groups were all working on their tasks, but needing more time. The clawing of hundreds of tiny claws was almost deafening. More voices from upstairs. Pounding. He's trapped in there. We have time. How do you know? Good point. Let's all get around the wheel and try to turn it at the same time. Ricky heard some shuffling all around as they all maneuvered around the floor vault door and began to turn. Are you turning it the right way? One asked, trying to figure out the righty-tighty, lefty-loosey rule. There was a pause as they thought and twirled their fingers around and tried to think about how old clocks rotated. Ricky put his hands on the wheel to see if he could feel them moving it. Unfortunately, there was nothing down here to jam it in to close it. And he wasn't sacrificing what could be the only available shotgun or any of its components in the entire city. He could maybe rig up the shotgun sling somehow to keep the wheel tight, but then he'd be slingless, which was no good for hands-free. Ricky heard renewed straining upstairs and felt the vault wheel budge slightly. Guys, I felt it move. Let's get a few more on here. Ricky heard more footsteps, and what sounded like 5 guys got on the vault door now and were all straining to turn it at the same time. Ricky felt it budge, but kept the wheel closed with brute strength. About 10 seconds in, though, he felt his feet sliding in the dust, unable to get traction. For a full minute, the 5 above strained against Ricky below until he was horizontal with his legs wrapped around the stairwell, leveraging the stairwell to augment his position as he held onto the wheel. Ricky grinned as it remained closed despite all of their efforts, him having to exert some energy, but thankful for a decent workout finally. They all strained as they took gasping breaths and let go, all falling over. Ricky mused they would probably be stronger, but they ran out of testosterone drugs a long time ago and always seemed to be challenged to create their own like normal people once had. Ricky let go of the stairs with his legs and scuttled down for a little bit, wondering what to do next. The people above scooted away as someone else came dragging a pry bar. "I got this." The guy comically tried a bunch of wrong ways to pry the vault door open, but was within an eighth of an inch on all sides, and there was no way to get his bar in between the gaps. Someone laughed at him and explained a rudimentary level of leverage and attempted to train him on how he'd use leverage to get the wheel open. He banged the bar on the vault a few times before he finally got it. Ricky could probably resist the prying, but it would drain him of all his energy, which would do him no good when they would inevitably get some explosives to blow the blast door open. If they had shape charges, it would open this up like a tin can and kill him in the process with the concussion. As the wheel started to open properly with little effort, Ricky thought quickly and racked the shotgun as loud as he could. He imagined everyone on top just about urinating themselves as they heard it, the universal sound for "Leave now, last warning." "Gun!" one screamed. The bar instinctively dropped from another, clanging loudly. Ricky went down the stairs, looking frantically. "Shells, guys? An exit? Anything?" "Shells," the smaller group announced. Ricky started digging and moving stuff out of the way. The rats had found some shells hidden between support beams. Ricky grabbed all the boxes of the heavy and large ammo that he could find, shoving them in his satchel. Voices above. "Everyone relax. It was a shotgun. There are 6 of us." "Shut up. Don't tell him how many people we have." "Well, more are coming. He probably doesn't have any ammo." They all stopped to think, the thought process taking forever because none of them were leaders in their deranged parody of a totalitarian neo-communist organization. They all remembered the Hollywood movies, though, before it got taken over by China and India. Shotguns blasted you across a room and vaporized you. They all had AKs, but knew based on memories that shotgun shells were several times bigger. They could get the door open, but nobody wanted to be the first in. Surely they would be flung across the room with a force that could dent the wall. Rational thought all but escaping them. More voices. "Someone's bringing a shield we can breach with. We'll be fine." The rest seemed to agree that they could wait a few more minutes. Ricky whispered, "Guys, we need an exit." Rat voices. "Yes, we found something. Yes, we did, but trapped." "Yes, it's trapped." Ricky responded in his head, "Of course it's trapped." Ricky finally figured out what happened. The mansion or whatever it was got blown up, but the occupant survived. He'd been hiding in the safe room where there was some kind of false wall, but it was trapped on the other side. If anyone but him came through, the exit would likely blow. He must have survived because nearly everything in here was gone, but nobody had been in since the explosion. Rats chewed and clawed through a portion of the wall. The few rats that made it through were working on the opening mechanism for the rest. They avoided the traps using their prior experience dealing with the merc traps and triggered an opening mechanism on the other side. The trap disarmed and the door opened. The remainder of the rats flooded through. Ricky grabbed his plant and as many more boxes of shells as he could and squeezed through with them. The rats all trained down the hall as fast as they could, carpeting it so that you couldn't see the floor. When they were all through, Ricky saw how the trap was disarmed and rearmed it, as it was local to this single entry. Ricky backed up a few steps and all the rats completed their exit. "Follow, follow," they said. "The way, we found the way." Ricky knew he only had moments left as they were forcing the blast door's mechanism open. He opened a box of shells and set a single shotgun shell pointing up so they would see, then rearmed the trap safely from the other side. Ricky ran down the tunnel in the dark. The rats had already got us a considerable ways ahead, and he could no longer see them. "We must hurry," came chattering in his ear. "Evil long gone." Whether imagined or not, the idea was right. They didn't have time. Ricky scurried as fast as he could down the hall. There was no cover or concealment except for the dark. A flashlight and a few shots from the AK would put him down. They had great range, although lacking marginal accuracy. 3 guys with 30 rounds apiece wouldn't matter much. Dead is dead. As he scuttled down the tunnel, he heard them breach the door and head in. "I heard him down the tunnel," one yelled, excited to figure out something so obvious. Ricky heard several echoes of footsteps down the metal stairs. "Let's go after him. We need him alive." Ricky felt flashlights wash across him. "I see him. Wait, I see a shotgun shell. I haven't seen one of those in ages. Finders keepers, right?" "No, don't." Ricky ran as fast as his little legs and large body would go. He wasn't used to cardio, only the occasional heavy lifting. He was running out of breath, but it wouldn't matter if he didn't make it far enough anyway. Shape charges directed the blast to collapse the tunnel and destroyed everyone and everything in that safe room. As the tunnel collapsed behind him, Ricky kept running as fast as he could with his potted plant to find where the rats were leading him in the dark. Chapter 6. Interlude. The day or two in the tunnel, so who knows. The rats led Ricky out of town safely. The pursuers had no way to track him with the tunnel collapsed. The tunnel went on for miles, eventually leading them to the outskirts. There had been tracks to where a trolley had been, but it was long since gone, used by the person who escaped before, Ricky presumed. Ricky had to take many breaks in the tunnel. He took the time to load his shotgun, including a round in the chamber. There were many types of shells. Ricky could tell by the weight. He wasn't sure what each was, though, as they were packed tight. He loaded what he felt were the lightest for now, not expecting long-distance engagements. Some of the heavier loads, which felt like slugs, he put on the side saddle. He realized a second saddle was on the buttstock next to the cheek riser. He put a 4mm, a few more shells on that to balance it out evenly. The shotgun would be heavy to a normal person, but to Ricky this gave a solid weight, like wearing a seatbelt on a car going a good speed way back when. He realized he missed the feeling and put some shells he figured were buckshot on the sling through the little loops and then tucked it back in his jacket. Ricky was also very hungry from the trek and took time to eat another MRE. He only had one rat with him, his big rat buddy Mortimer. They shared the MRE together. Ricky needed water too, though. The rat shared with him the locations of water that was naturally filtered, running down the side of the tunnel wall. Ricky was very thankful, and Mortimer explained that they stick together and make a good team. Ricky agreed. These rats had saved his life already so many times ever since this began the last day or two. Ricky had lost track of what day and time it was based on being in the tunnel for so long. The other rats already having long since found their way out. Eventually, after a few meals and some rest, Ricky made it out of the tunnel and into the daylight. Chapter 7. Greenery. Day 2. Night. The sun was setting. Ricky had been walking for a long time. Chapter 7. Greenery. Day 2. Night. The sun was setting. Ricky had been walking for a long time and he slept a few times in there somewhere. He'd eaten a few times as well, so he figured it was the second day since the flooding. He wasn't sure how long he walked. He became re-aware that he could walk a long way in a semi-trance and would be alert again when he needed to be, barely conscious of the journey. Buried in his mind, he was hardly aware of the walking. When he would regain full consciousness, he could never remember what he was thinking about. It always worked out, though, and he never got hurt. This must have been where all the rats went, Ricky thought. There was an empty road. One direction led into the city, one direction led away. He communed with the rat on his shoulder. Mortimer agreed with him that they should head away from the city. Down the road they went. On an unconscious level, Ricky was aware of thousands of rats planning and plotting out the best course, sharing information. They followed traces and scents, hunted for food, ran into enemies and traps, ran into an old rival, the black rats. Ricky got tugged back into consciousness again as he walked down the road, a thought entering his mind. Black rats. Standing in front of him, blocking the road, was a black rat. Its eyes blazing through the night, and teeth that had been worn down several times to keep proper shape. Rats unfortunately had to keep chewing nearly non-stop, or their teeth would keep growing into a curl, and it was a very, very, very painful way to go. Ricky and the other brown rats had chased the black rats out of the city quite a while ago. The two species were quite different and didn't get along well. They had different breeding rates, carried different diseases, and so on. If one species of rat was predominant, it wasn't a big deal to keep the other species suppressed if immediate decisive action was taken. It had a dual role of rat safety, but also people safety. People were more or less tolerant of brown rats, even the giant sewer varieties, but black rats would cause the city to go into a panic. The mass extermination would affect both populations, leaving a vacuum. Ricky remembered helping with this, helping to keep their numbers down as well. Ricky and Mortimer had killed many black rats, and eventually they were driven entirely from the city. The outcasts must have ended up here. The black rat in the road eyeballed Ricky. The dark creature was neither afraid nor curious. It wasn't sick, nor was it hungry. It seemed to be asking a question. "What are you doing here?" "We got chased out." "Welcome to the club." "The flood?" "Yes, there was a flood. It has affected the black rats as well." Ricky thought for a moment about the situation. "We don't need to fight out here. The black rats could have huge numbers. The brown rats wouldn't survive if the black rats had been out here breeding for however many months it's been." There seemed to be a reluctance from the black rat, as if the situation wasn't in its favor either. It was as if it couldn't decide whether to bluff, act confident, or overcompensate. Ricky sensed this and tried to explain to the rat, who wouldn't move from the middle of the road. "We aren't here to fight you. We realize we're in your home now and at your mercy." Ricky tried to word it to appeal to their pride. It seemed to work, and the black rat seemed to hold its head a little bit higher. Ricky continued, "We humbly request that we're allowed safe passage to follow our own path." The black rat seemed to think to itself, then trotted off without a word. Ricky continued walking throughout the night. The town was completely barren, chewed down to the wood of every single thing edible by rats. In his unconscious, Ricky saw barrels with revolving lids and starved rats stuck inside that had eaten each other to the last and then starved. He saw empty grain stores destroyed by rats. The gardens were gone, eaten by rats. The soy-based cords of every vehicle in the area, eaten by rats. The people were gone, either by plague, fear, or starvation. Ricky knew that another fight with the black rats would be a bad trade. While the brown rats were bigger traditionally and even had faster reproductive rates, the black rats were significantly more agile and were amazing climbers. Ricky pushed the potential out of his mind for the moment, not having a solution for it other than what was already prescribed to the black rat sentry in the road. With that, Ricky slipped into a trance and began walking down the road in the dark again. Black rats stopped fighting us, linking up with other brown rats displaced from huge flooded basin, regrouping. Ricky thought he was heading towards a light in the dark, somewhere with power. He turned around. The city didn't have power. What had happened? The rats. The rats chewed through all the power cables, the internet cables, everything. Ricky shuddered a moment as he walked, and then continued towards the light reflected up into the sky. He was suddenly aware of a drizzle that turned back into rain. Mortimer held Ricky's coat collar tight as they walked, each keeping the other warm as temperatures hovered around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The trip would have to wait, though. It was time for Ricky to take a nap. He mentally tucked away where the light was coming from and went to the nearest building. "This house looks good. All clear in here." Ricky went into the house and laid his potted plant down, then got his satchel out, laid it down with it under his head, and fell fast asleep. Ricky dreamed of a girl whose features he could barely make out aside from the black hair, black eyeliner, black fingernails, but an aura of light. She was pragmatic and calculating, patient but lethal. She stared at him as he slept, not menacing or threatening, but judging, assessing. She had something cradled in her arms, but he couldn't see it in the shadows. She stared at him for a while, and Ricky let her. He wasn't a threat unless he was cornered, and wanted her to know that he was respecting her territory that she had carved out. He was passively trying to assess her as well, but didn't want to scare her off. At the same time, they both felt a third presence, a man with a sickly green feeling about him and a dark aura. There was a growing crescendo of chittering that was both alarming and unsettling at the same time. The girl in black disappeared, and Ricky stirred. Everyone has rallied. We are ready. Chapter 8. Walk. Hard. Abandoned house. Day 3. Dawn. Get up. It's time. Ricky got up. Mortimer saw that Ricky was awake and hopped onto him to ride on his shoulder. We have to go. Ricky paused for a thought, but there was none. I don't know where, but we have to go. Ricky cracked an MRE and shared it with Mortimer. No food here. We have to move on. Once they had their share of the proceeds, Ricky threw the package into the corner where it was immediately devoured by several rats. A few rats came up to Ricky that had their tails tangled up, and he untangled the tails for them. They scurried back off, happy to be separated again. All set? No answers or response, so he went with his potted plant in hand. No nibbles taken out of it, as the rats knew better than to eat his precious chamomile and lavender plants. Ricky intently listened and heard the sounds of farm equipment from many miles away, as there was nothing to drown the sound out. Ricky looked around and saw pits of burned dead rats. He saw wood with bite marks in it. He was in the outskirts of an empty town and debated walking towards civilization. What would I say? Hi, my name is Ricky. I came from the city, and I'm not here to hurt you. They might not understand the difference between brown rats and black rats. They might have cats or dogs. They might even try to shoot at him thinking he's a marauder or looking for handouts or a scout. Ricky had a better idea. He would walk around the settlement and position himself on the other side, so instead of walking towards civilization, he walked to the next barren and abandoned city. It took nearly all day, passing a giant airstrip, but he finally made it. At some point, he thought he heard some people on motorcycles drive by on the freeway, but he was on the highway, so he didn't see him. He knew better than to stay on the main roads unless there was no other option. Ricky was in a new city, and it was an absolute hellhole, or used to be. Now there wasn't much left, probably for the better. Trailer parks decimated, crack houses falling apart, nobody to be found. The park was destroyed beyond recognition. Very little here to eat. Watch out for needles. Keep getting poked. Glass everywhere. Ricky sensed something behind him, but far away, keeping its distance, moving fast by night instead of slow by day. Untrusting but not afraid. Measuring and calculating risks. Confident but cautious. Ricky looked around at this dilapidated trash heap masquerading as a city. We can't stay here. It was a dangerous place, broken glass and needles, little in the way of sustenance for rats. The ground itself was corrupted by toxins and would kill any plant placed here for many years to come. The rain eased up, and Ricky looked north and east and thought. He had got past the settlement's northern edge, so this was a good time to go around. The rats spoke of a bridge he needed to cross. That was a freeway bridge. Ricky peered at the bridge that the rats had directed him to. It was the only way across for miles in each direction. The rats assured him that there was nobody for at least a half a mile in each direction. Ricky calculated and figured a sniper could still be covering the bridge from further out or higher up. The sun hadn't completely crested the mountains yet. With the rats' reassurance there was no traps on the bridge, Ricky scuttled across as fast as he could along one edge. Upon completing the crossing, he immediately took cover and concealment again. He felt and saw the brown rats picking up the slack behind him along the edges of the bridge. The bridge had been sporadic with vehicle placement, the bridge not yet being a key component to any entry or exit to a thoroughfare being used. It didn't look like there'd been any firefights on the bridge, but a few of the cars had been shot out. It had appeared to be more of a pleasure than a strategy. Ricky would have been more concerned if there'd been no cover at all. All that was put to rest, though, because Ricky was now safely on the other side of the highway. His next task was to circle around the next local encampment, so he had somewhere more logical and strategic to collect his thoughts. The bridge had been the highway crossing over the freeway, so Ricky didn't have the freeway to worry about anymore. He laid in wait for the rats to catch up with his movements and heard more motorcycles. Ricky scuttled back to where he could see the overpass and saw the bikers heading back to where they'd come from. They looked like a cross between law enforcement and a biker gang. Ricky didn't get the feeling that they were evil, but the bikers definitely presented a presence of authority. He slumped down, his back to the concrete barrier. Where was everyone? What happened? How long have I been in the sewers again? The rats completed their maneuver and began taking up forward positions. It was time to move. There's a path to more food, but it is not safe. There is a path to less food, but it is more safe. Ricky thought. The safe route seemed best. He wanted to position himself far enough away from the encampment to where he wouldn't be perceived as a threat. He scuttled off amongst cover and made his way towards the safe route before the rats would decide for him. Away they went. There was a faint touch of pursuit, although not menacing but curious. Ricky walked throughout the day, more alert than usual. There were hints of a more civilized group here, but unable to maintain. They had to fall further back. The survivors must be at the town nearby that Ricky had been circling around. He was closer now and could tell they definitely had power. Electricity. Ricky could see they'd been working on farms and even getting some fuel. Ricky kept himself a good distance from the farms. He wanted to complete his semi-circle and find a place he could hunker down and blend in. In the meantime, they might not see him as a threat anymore. Maybe someone who they had never detected who had survived on their own somehow. Then he wouldn't have to worry about being bothered. He could find an abandoned basement somewhere and go back to growing his chamomile and lavender. Chapter 9. Finally some rest. The coming weeks. Ricky and his brown furry friends found a nice little place to settle down. It was nestled between a flooded basin and some nice peaceful people that were happy to escape the flood and only wanted to farm. Ricky couldn't enter in their encampment, of course, but he could definitely stay several blocks out and take care of them as best as he could. He sensed several miles away his darker counterpart also sitting and waiting. She didn't have any sinister motives, only was trying to survive, like him. She covered the other flank. His rats sang a name over and over again. Beninka. Beninka stayed on her side of the outskirts and Ricky stayed on his. There was enough for all of them to scavenge and the rats settled down and everything was as peaceful as it could be, all things considered. Rats could basically eat anything, and they did. None of them minded. In their dreams, Ricky and Beninka kept seeing each other for brief moments. It took a while at first. They both weren't sleeping at the same time at first. Eventually they kept tagging each other at the beginning or end until they naturally harmonized. She was nice company. They understood each other. Ricky liked having someone nearby that understood him, and it helped him sleep better. She wasn't very close, but she was close enough. Chapter 10. Unlikely Visit. Ricky's Spot. Mid-spring. It'd been a few weeks, nothing had happened. Nobody was hunting him. Beninka was over on her spot. Ricky had never seen her in person, only in dreams. He liked to stare at her, usually grinning stupidly or looking hopeful or lost. She didn't mind. She'd preen or fidget with things, then show him them. He would shrug, and she would shrug and toss it away and find something else. This would go back and forth until it was time to wake up. Ricky decided this place was the place he wanted to stay. It was getting warmer outside. His plants were excited to start their spring routine since they'd been exposed to the new climate, and the plants seemed to like it. He found a place that was similar in lighting and angle to where they were back in the sewer, and he dug a hole and set his plants to dirt. The lavender and chamomile would need a few days to rest, and he would make sure they weren't rustled. Ricky had sprinkled some of his wildflower seeds around when he first arrived on the off chance. Turns out that some wildflowers hung around, and they were already several different random kinds of flowers popping up in the backyard near where he'd been hiding out. This made him happy, and he picked a few of the flowers to freshen up with. There were other flowers popping up also, but he left them alone. They didn't have any medicinal purposes that he was familiar with. None of these people had started herb gardens before the collapse, but he was hoping somehow to get one started. His rats hadn't said that they found any yet, but he was sure soon they could be popping up any time. It'd have to be special circumstances, like if they were heirloom or self-reproducing. Obviously, if he got near the stronghold he had scouted out, they would have herbs. He wouldn't dare disrupt their ecosystem. He had to find his own herbs, so he could at least take care of a few remedies himself. Ricky didn't have anything to trade either. He had to sit in his spot and behave himself with his MREs and rat friends, and of course his dreams. The stronghold, of course, wouldn't need his MREs, and he didn't have a ton left. He'd been trying to supplement it with whatever he could find or his rat friends found. They'd found some paper around a metal can they couldn't get into, and they let him know. He opened it up and they'd all share it. Sometimes they'd find an animal, but it'd be far too past healthy for him. The rats would be fine though, and they appreciated his generosity. They made a good team. Ricky got done planting and decided to take a rest. Then he turned around and a little girl no older than 5 or 6 was standing there. Seemed like she already had a discussion prepared for these circumstances. "Hey, mister." Ricky stammered. This was unexpected. He hadn't actually talked to anybody in a long time. He blurted the first thing out that came to his mind. "Where are your parents?" He thought to himself, great, I sound like a weirdo. Didn't that used to be a normal thing to say? I'm not asking her to see if they're around, but why they aren't around. Why? Do I need to call my parents for something? He'd been lost in thought and already forgot to come up with a follow-up thing to say. Totally your call. You gotta do what keeps you the most safe. He reminded himself that usually children are a pretty good judge of character. If he was a bad guy, surely she wouldn't want to be around anyway after this interaction. She looked at him and raised an eyebrow. I think I'm fine. Got any flowers? He looked around almost for dramatic theater more than anything. I saw some purple ones come up the next yard over, he pointed casually. Thanks. See ya. Oh, also, nice rat. Ricky blushed, which hadn't happened in a long time he could remember. The rat on his shoulder, which he'd forgotten about, stood up a little prouder. The little girl skipped off into the next yard. Ricky wondered to himself, is this normal now, for kids to just go through every yard like there's no boundaries? He tried to remember. No, he was pretty sure that kids used to actually ask first or some such, but nobody was around. He looked around to see where she went, but she was already gone. He decided to go back into the house and rest. Digging holes and planting bushes was a challenge, and it really wore him out. Ricky went back inside and went into a closet under some stairs. He lifted up a heavy trapdoor that opened up into a crawl space and went inside with a thunk. The suction closed it behind him, and he felt the cool air around him. It reminded him of his home back in the city before it got flooded. Thankfully, this crawl space didn't flood. The neighborhood he was in was a little high up, so it was spared the water settling in it. Most of the water was in the valley behind him. There was a huge water basin now. It would be for years to come. He remembered when there was a lot of hard workers down there, but something bad must have happened. Ricky wrestled around until he got into a comfy position. He was about to drift off, but felt rather than heard something buzzing or vibrating. Ricky felt around, and there was an oblong plastic object that wasn't there before. It buzzed and it vibrated and started moving around. Mortimer looked at it with him in half amusement and half incredulousness. Ricky asked how they'd not sensed it before. Mortimer responded that it had been cleared and deemed not a risk. It vibrated more and hummed its way towards Ricky. Ricky shuffled back a half and it stopped and started buzzing the other way. He smacked it too hard, trying to stop it from moving around. Remembering his strength, he lifted his hand, hoping he hadn't crushed it. It had indeed stopped humming at him in his hand. It started buzzing again, and he almost dropped it, startled. Ricky was able to barely contain his nerves, though, and held it close to his face to try to read the screen in the darkness. The screen didn't say much, and he realized he needed to open it up to see the full readout. He tried all the different sides before he got the correct side open. Thankfully, he didn't break any of the hinges. Inside was a pleasant female face, to him at least, with black makeup and highlights in her hair. There was already a chain of information she'd been sending him, and he figured out the console, then read it backwards at the beginning, then back again. It consisted of several highs and hope you get this okays. It explained that it was a phone using secure point-to-point software and she wanted to talk to him. He couldn't think of what to say back, so he simply said, "I'm Ricky." She explained that her name was Beninka, which didn't surprise Ricky at all. He did enjoy finally getting to talk to her, though. He enjoyed her company. It made him feel a little bit warmer, even though there was a physical distance, like they'd known each other for a long time somehow, although they'd never met during the sewer confrontations. Ricky thought for a second, and sent that he had a friend named Mortimer, but that it was impossible to take a picture. Beninka said her friend's name was Esmeralda, and she couldn't take a picture either. They both chuckled to themselves at the inside joke as their respective friends looked puzzled in the phone at the same time. Unimpressed, the two creatures fell asleep while they would go to work on their own tasks subconsciously. Ricky and Beninka talked for a few more minutes, but not really saying anything. Ricky said he'd keep his phone with him, and Beninka appreciated that. After the chattering back and forth for a few minutes, they both decided to go to sleep, and spent the night in dreams together. All the while, frogs in the distance talked about all the things frogs probably croak and burp about all night long. Sleep time. Frogs had been collecting around the new water basin to the east. The frogs seemed pleasant enough and were content with floating around, swimming and eating bugs. Their main priority seemed to be trying futilely to keep down the mosquito population. Ricky and Beninka watched the basin, standing shoulder to shoulder. It was peaceful. Their rats skidded around the beach looking for tasty goodies. Occasionally they would find a freshwater clam and all would start freaking out. Humans couldn't eat those clams, of course, due to the overwhelmingly deadly bacteria they had. The rats, however, didn't seem to mind and enjoyed eating the shell and clam. They went out to find more. The rats left the frogs alone, as rats liked to hear the sounds the frogs made, and frogs kept the insects down. A rat got too close to a frog at some point in the night, and the rat spent 3 hours paralyzed like it was dead. The other rats played a trick on it and set it afloat on the lake. It came back several hours later talking about how there were crickets on the other side. None of the rats could reliably get over there, and they set out to kill and eat as many crickets as they could. The crickets were in the green phase and quite tasty. The rats decided this would be a good exercise to keep their numbers in check, as nobody liked the insect and it didn't serve any valid purpose. Not like rats and frogs did, at least. The crickets stayed very spread out, so they were hard to find. The crickets did this so they would not eat with or fight each other. They only got together to breed. It wasn't breeding time, so it was a challenge. The rats all split up trying to catch the crickets. A few stayed around, making sure no new crickets came into the area. The frogs and rats had a good time together playing around the newly formed gigantic lake, and Ricky and Beninka had a good time with each other watching all the critters do their thing. Soon it was time to wake up. Chapter 11. Scavenging for Goodies. Ricky, next morning. Ricky woke up rested, grabbed his phone, dug out of his hiding place, and then went to go see what was what for the day. He checked the phone's battery and it was at full charge. One of those new batteries, he thought to himself, referencing the new prototype batteries that lasted close to a month on a single charge. The batteries had been in development before the collapse, but he recalled the big battery companies wanting to prolong them as much as possible, as it would make roughly 95% of the battery market obsolete. Ricky went around and looked for his plants, and they were doing very well. He smiled at them and looked around for any potential issues, and there were none. They needed little water, and he found a 5-gallon bucket that had been sitting out after a little scavenging. He carried it back, which was barely an effort for his muscled and centered body, and then sprinkled some water on each of the plants, about half a foot out from the base. Ricky then looked around and tried to find a gutter or something to put the bucket in, to make sure it would refill in short order whenever it rained again. It was going to be a nice bright sunny day, and Ricky hoped the Pacific Northwest hadn't rained itself out. He chuckled to himself as if to say, "Yeah, right." As if on cue, it started sprinkling a cool mist across the land. Ricky looked for something to do. He remembered that he had a phone. He checked it, but there was no new messages. Ricky texted hi, then put the phone away to scout around. A butterfly flew by and it landed on Ricky. Mortimer hissed at it and it fluttered away. Do butterflies enjoy this time of year? Ricky wondered. He shrugged, unable to remember exactly when butterflies came out to adventure. He followed the butterfly's path to some fencing and decided it would be a good time to start fortifying the area. Then he wondered if maybe it made more sense to look like nobody was here so they would pass on through. It didn't matter though, that little girl found me soon enough. As if on cue, she was back in his yard again. "Hey, mister." "Hello, little one. What is your concern today?" She looked at him quizzically. "I'm supposed to be making sure there's no bad bugs around here." "There are definitely no bad bugs. I am making sure of it." She looked at him again, as if unsure if he was joking or being serious. "Well, if you see any bad bugs, you let me know. Then I let the lieutenant know, and then the lieutenant tells the commander, and we can do something about it." It was Ricky's turn to make a silly face. She giggled at him. "I'm kidding. We say that to scare people away. I tell the guys on the farm so we can be sure to be careful. If I scream, though, there's a small army that will come looking for me." She looked serious now. "Well, if you scream, I guarantee nobody is going to like what happens to whatever made you scream." She nodded. Ricky realized she might scream if she saw a rat, and then everyone would be in trouble. You aren't afraid of rats, are you?" She thought for a second. "Rats, do they act like squirrels?" Ricky started trying to figure out how to respond, but she giggled, interrupting him. "Of course rats are fine, I know what they are." Ricky sighed. "Okay, that's good. I have a pet rat, so I'd hate for it to scare you." But then he realized she'd already seen the rat before and he'd already forgot. In reality, Ricky was in league with hundreds of rats, but they were all out doing rat things at the moment. She shrugged. There was a second of silence between the two. Ricky thought of another question to bridge the uncomfortable silence. "Hey, the people at the farm, they don't mind that I'm here, do they?" "Well, they don't mind about you probably, but they don't know. It is assumed that people are out here, as long as they aren't bad people." Ricky knew he didn't have to explain in redundancy that he wasn't bad. Kids were amazing at telling the difference. He'd never had a problem with kids in the past. It was always adults whose minds were messed up. Ricky realized he had trailed off in thought when the girl asked him a question. "What's your friend's name?" "The rat on your shoulder." Ricky mentally slapped himself. She, of course, could see the rat. "His name is Mortimer. He's a good rat." Mortimer swelled up a little in pride in between sniffing the air and keeping an eye out. "Did he die or something?" Ricky thought for a second and responded, "No, he isn't dead. It's hard to explain. He's my friend, though. Most people can't see him." "Oh," the girl responded. "He's like an imaginary friend." "Ha," Ricky responded, astonished that this conversation was going so casually. "Yes, pretty much exactly like an imaginary friend." Mortimer seemed to think for a second to himself if he believed that this was an insult or not, then decided in a lot of ways it was an accurate statement. The girl asked, "How do I get my own?" Ricky thought for a second and responded, "Well, they sort of choose you. You only need to have an open mind and a spirit that is true to yourself. And you never know." She seemed to understand exactly what that meant, and she thanked him and skipped away. He mumbled to Mortimer, "She's gonna be trouble, eh?" He silently nodded back. Ricky thought about reinforcing the fence so she couldn't get back in, but he figured she could probably find a ton of ways in if she wanted to. She was pretty tiny after all. Kids could get into anything. It was time for Ricky to start helping patrol. Maybe he would find something fresh to eat. Ricky headed south to see what there was to see. Before long, he came across a wheelbarrow. It had ridiculously oversized tires, which made it easy going over the terrain and could fit a lot of things inside. Ricky didn't know what he wanted yet, but he knew he could fit nearly anything in this. Walking around through everyone's backyards, Ricky felt the weight of the shotgun reminding him that it was there. It didn't need to be shifted around, thankfully, but it made Ricky think he needed some kind of steel tool of some sort. Ricky had been avoiding nearly all the main roads up to this point, sneaking through blocks and blocks of people's backyards. He thought maybe it was time to stop doing that. If the people weren't really bad, and he didn't have to worry about snipers, maybe it was okay for him to start doing some road work. He'd had this plan for a few days now in his head, and it was finally time to get it to work. There were tons of cars everywhere, and they were all already opened up and drained of their fuel. Ricky didn't mind this. He rolled up with his rolling cart and looked through each car. They were all well rotted out from multiple years of being exposed. He didn't mind though. For his purpose, it was okay. From his observations of the neighborhood, it hadn't looked like many battles were fought here. A lot of people simply got up and left nearly all their belongings. Their belongings were all stripped out along with the fuel, and it all sat. There were few fruits and vegetables because of the genetically modified ordinances that had passed, so there really wasn't much to scavenge or live off of. Ricky's only hope was to find some tools that hadn't been scavenged already, and try to find the few fruits and vegetables. He was sure that some were left, and that had been self-reproducing. People hadn't turned in all their food plants when they were supposed to switch over to GM foods. The GM foods were supposed to grow better in cities and produce more, but you had to fully repurchase every year or subscribe to a ludicrously expensive license. People had done some preparations, though. Hidden things like potatoes and onions under the ground, apples, pears, and cherries that had been the next to be replaced with genetically modified variants. The lobbyists had finally got their way for that final push, but then the collapse happened. Ricky had been seeing it referenced in newspapers, and he would find discarded and read some of the articles before he turned the paper into his nest in the sewers of the city. As Ricky went from car to car looking for tools, he thought about how he had originally wanted to live in one of the many bomb shelters around the city. They were unmarked, and nobody even knew they were bomb shelters anymore, but the shelters usually had some other stuff in them. It had been illegal to plan or prepare for nuclear war in the state, so the bomb shelters had to get masked, and most people forgot. Nobody was re-explained, reintroduced. Nuclear war never happened. The first or second time, and the bunkers kept getting ignored. Ricky always dreamed about grabbing one, but never could until he found that one that he'd escaped out of. That counted for at least one person that hadn't forgot about them, Ricky figured. So now here he was, going through cars and trucks looking for tools. All of the obvious worker vans had already been raided and cleaned out. Every time Ricky was done searching a vehicle, he would pop it into neutral and shove it into the road. Head it towards the intersection, put the emergency brake on, close the doors, hood and back. He was plenty strong, and pushing the smaller cars took virtually no effort for him. All of the trucks were left where they were at, but all of their components closed when he was done. This way he could easily tell what he'd sorted through. In a few hours of doing this, he found a claw hammer, a crowbar, tons of obligatory baseball bats, heavy-duty bolt cutters, and a couple different trucker tools. One was sort of a pickaxe with a heavy-duty hook on the other side, and then the other one was similar to a crowbar with some multi-tools and was partially bladed. After Ricky barricaded each intersection in a square radius around his block and went through many cars and trucks, then he started heading back to take his tools to the house he was hiding in. On his way back, he remembered that there had been a big steel box on the back of a truck he hadn't been able to get into. Ricky popped it open with the bolt cutters and pry bar and was saddened to not see anything inside but useless power tools. None of the bigger tools were air or battery operated, so he figured they weren't any good to him. Ricky wasn't super good with tools anyway. There was a small toolbox in it. Ricky opened it and it had some tiny ratchets and wrenches in it. Ricky took the toolbox and closed the lid and left the rest there. Maybe someone else would find use for them, like the people that lived nearby. There was another car with a steel locked box under the seat. He remembered which one it was and used the bolt cutters from a few different angles until he popped the cables off. The box definitely had something in it that weighed at least a few pounds, so the entire box went with. He would get it open later. Ricky felt done for a while and was hungry. Careful not to leave a huge trail back, Ricky took a path back to his spot. Went through varieties of ground cover before ducking through some trees. He opened a back gate and got his wheelbarrow of tools through, then put it under some cover so it couldn't fill up with water. The rain started coming down a little harder, and Ricky appreciated that he was done and could take a break. Ricky sat down in some lawn furniture that had been shielded from the elements and took out his hammer and crowbar and the lockbox he recovered. Ricky initially planned on slamming it open with the hammer and crowbar, but decided not to, as everyone for miles would be able to hear that he had found something. Instead, he dug through his tools and found a flathead screwdriver. Normally under the car seat, this box would be nearly impenetrable. However, out in the open, Ricky got into it fairly easy by applying pressure at the right points. Without hardly a noise, the box opened, and inside lay a .380 pocket pistol with several mags. The pistol model was very popular before the collapse, especially with the ladies. He wondered to himself why the owner hadn't taken it. Surely wherever they ended up, it probably was a very regrettable situation to leave it. Ricky popped the mag out and racked the slide, and a round flew out and off somewhere. Ricky inspected it closer now that it was cleared, and it was the second model in the series and had all the updates. The slide release worked like it was supposed to. The slide had a mag catch. Held the slide open on an empty mag. Ricky looked at it some more, and the mag release worked well and had a laser sight that seemed to hold its charge really well. Ricky's tummy grumbled. He was almost out of meals. Everything in the vehicles had been trashed. He hadn't found any food to scavenge yet. It was pretty warm out. Ricky hoped that maybe some potatoes or something was growing somewhere. He couldn't think of what else was in season. He wasn't very good at this. If he could find a field or a park, maybe he could find a new growth of ferns or mushrooms or something. Ricky got lost in thought again, trying to figure out what kind of food he could try to find, like maybe strawberries or rhubarb or something. He wasn't sure. Then, out of nowhere, the girl popped back up. She had a basket. "Hey, how are you, little one?" "Martina," the little girl said curtly. "Okay, names then, that's fine. I'm Ricky. How are you?" "Martina." Ricky tried to say her name as sweet as possible, and it made her smile. "I'm fine, Ricky. I brought you lunch." Ricky couldn't believe it and wanted to tear up at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Martina. I don't know what to say." "Well, you could say thank you, then try to trade me something. We're big into trading." "I only have some tools right now. Do you want a tool, like a hammer or something?" She made a noise like blah and said she doesn't need tools. "Well, how bad would your parents freak out if you had a gun?" Her eyes got wide. Ricky grabbed the reliable pocket pistol and showed it to her in a safe manner. Had the slide open and she showed her it was empty. "You're what, 10, yeah? 10.5. Oh my goodness, 10.5, okay. Well, that's plenty fine then. How about I trade you this pistol and some ammo and mags for that food? We have a deal?" So, she obviously couldn't believe it. She had no idea how she was ever gonna get a gun of her own. And now here it was. She couldn't contain herself, and what started off as a semi-cordial formality had netted her something amazing. But was it too good to be true? "Well, don't you want it, Mr. Ricky?" "I don't need it, but someone like you, who might run into bad guys, this could come in really handy. Here, we'll keep it unloaded. He showed it to her again. See, no rounds in the chamber and no mag. He slid it across the table to where she was standing. Pick it up, but keep it pointed in a safe direction, obviously. She thought about it for a second. She knew from the adults at camp that guns were not dangerous if they were unloaded, but to treat them like they were loaded anyway. She picked it up and it fit in her little hands perfectly. Within moments, little Martina was mimicking some training she'd obviously seen, and was looking for a place to stuff it in her clothes. Ricky looked and her finger was indexed and everything. No finger on the trigger. So she'd definitely been watching people in her town shoot and train already. Ricky took the food out of the basket and set it on the table and set all the mags and bullets in her basket. I bet you if you ask the guys at camp, they'll teach you how to shoot properly. She seemed too startled for a second at him beginning to talk, and then remembered what was going on. She'd already stuffed it somewhere, so it seemed like the deal was complete. The gun. The pistol. She looked in her bag and saw several mags and ammo, which made her happy. Martina looked around and found something to put over the mags and ammo so they wouldn't gather unwanted attention. Martina did a little curtsy and Ricky nodded slowly and off she went. The food was wrapped in a paper bag of sorts. Ricky unwrapped it and it had a medley of vegetables and fruit and an egg. Holy moly, an egg. I haven't had a fresh egg in forever. Ricky thought about it, and while he got more nutrients if he ate the egg raw, he really needed the protein, which was absorbed almost twice as much as if he could cook the egg somehow. He grabbed his bolt cutters and went through a few sheds until he found some propane in a stove. From the house, he got a pot and a match and went out and lit the stove and threw everything in the pot and had a nice, fresh spring meal. Afterwards, Ricky felt a million times better and could actually think clearly. He instantly regretted not offering to share his meal with Beninka. He checked his phone when he was done eating and no messages yet this morning. Hopefully she was okay. What was he thinking? She was fine. She'd been out this long alone anyway because Ricky wouldn't share the sewer. He had his critters to think about though, and he knew that historically they could never coexist for long without such fierce competition and next to no resources. Still, it was dangerous to be alone. Even he felt it. It was impossible to look everywhere at once and be prepared for everything. If there were enough resources out there, they could coexist fine, couldn't they? He wasn't sure. Then he finally got a message from her as the phone began buzzing around the table, trying to throw itself off the edge onto the concrete. Ricky put his hand down to catch the phone in time, only for it to change its mind and rumble in the other direction. With his other hand, he grabbed and stopped it in place. Ricky glanced down at the chat log with phone in place. Found a man. He's hurt. Don't think he's going to last much longer. I don't like it. Phone will guide you to me. Ricky looked around and he was all finished with everything, so he wrote in a little note to Martina to please take care of his plants and that he'd be back as soon as he could. Ricky then headed off to where the phone said to go. Chapter 12. Unsettling discovery. Afternoon. Ricky shuffled along the way. He told the rats to go ahead and keep on what they were doing, which they were okay with. There was still a lot of things to do, like look for potatoes and onions. They probably needed a break anyway. As Ricky passed random water containers, he would tip them all over. No use giving the mosquitoes an extra breeding ground, he figured. He tried to remember where they all were so he could pick up some of them on his return. They were mostly 5-gallon buckets and in fairly good shape. Ricky walked for an hour or so to the north, and Mortimer notified him that they were quite clearly in black rat territory. Ricky could feel it. The aura was different. It wasn't bad necessarily, but definitely a different attitude. Everything was a lot more serious. As he got closer to the phone coordinates, he realized that there was nobody located where the phone was telling him to be. It wasn't bad necessarily, but definitely a different attitude. Everything was a lot more serious. As he got closer to the phone coordinates, he realized that there was nobody located where the phone was telling him to be. He felt a rifle being pointed at him from somewhere. He slowly put his stumpy arms to each side and made sure his hands were showing from his coat. He twirled around a few times, kicking at the ground to make sure there was nothing going to poke his rear, then sat down. He closed his eyes and sat peacefully until he sensed a strict and absolute presence behind him. Without opening his eyes, Ricky said all he could think of. "Hi." There was silence. The scent of licorice caught Ricky's nose. He felt a poke in his back of an aggressive flash suppressor of a rifle. Ow! He got poked again. Ow! Then a sort of high-pitched but still pleasant enough voice finally spoke. It had a hint of flirtiness and coyness to it. "You're weird." Ricky turned around and shuffling, and a rifle looked exactly like it did in his head, although the moderately aggressive flash suppressor he hadn't noticed before. A minor detail, but it was pointed right in his face now. The carbon fiber mesh around the cold hammer-forged barrel looked like a hollow baseball bat and was as strong as any steel. Milled receiver, not stamped. Looked like an AK, but had a giant box mag. "Nice Galil," she humphed indifferently, then kicked him over. Ricky rolled onto his back and stared up at her, grinning like an idiot. Rifle pointed down at him, but he didn't see it anymore. "Hi, I hope we can be friends." She humphed again and let her rifle hang down and offered him a black-gloved hand. He took it, and she yanked him up to a standing position effortlessly. Ricky noted to himself that she was very nearly as strong as he was, despite her relatively petite frame in contrast to his stocky one. He continued grinning at her, and she smacked him open-handed with her glove hand. He expected it, though it was faster than he anticipated. He let his head roll, with it a little extra than it needed to for added effect, but he ended up not needing to exaggerate it that much. She was indeed as strong as he guessed. Then suddenly there was a black rat on her shoulder, reminding her to stop messing around. She nodded and pointed away. Mortimer snickered at the situation, and Beninka smirked while Esmeralda looked away defiantly. They walked to get Beninka's phone, then walked a ways to the body of a researcher on the ground. He appeared to have passed an hour or so prior and was riddled with syringes. "What the heck happened to this guy?" Ricky said sadly, his goofiness smacked away. "Found him here, attacked by druggies or something. Guess I scared them away as they closed in. Several of them, I don't know. He's a CDC researcher according to his lab coat. Nobody deserves this." "What do we do?" Ricky asked, unsure if Beninka had some kind of plan or thought. "He got attacked a ways away from here," Beninka trailed off. Ricky thought about it and looked to the north. "I saw some used needles coming through. It was pretty nasty. Didn't think much of it." "Needles, huh? A valuable clue. I'll check his pockets. Cover me, would you?" Beninka winked at Ricky suggestively. Ricky blushed and swished open his coat, presenting his shotgun like a seasoned professional at the low and ready. He then began looking around and reaching out with his other senses. It took him a moment to filter out the black rat aura. Then he had a clear feel for the surrounding area. Within moments, Beninka had found something. Found his ID. He's CDC, all right. I'm seeing human bite marks on him for some reason. Also, he has a USB stick. She slotted the USB stick into her phone, but it was encrypted. She thought for a second, rummaging through the poor needle-riddled corpse for a few more moments, and produced a different style of phone. Beninka slotted the stick into his phone, and it properly unlocked. According to his ID, he's some kind of field researcher, and I have access to his notes. He was out trying to gather live data for their lab. Apparently the CDC is still functional here north a bit, working on viruses as if the area hasn't been handed on a silver platter to the clowns. Doesn't say where it is, though. There we go. It's gotta be by the needles I found. Somewhere in that area. It's built like a fortress in plain sight. It's fairly easy to miss. I think we could find it. Together. Benika smirked at him and snipped. Well, I can't let you go alone. It's too dangerous, of course. Off they went. Off they went in the general direction Ricky felt they were supposed to go in, as well as partially from memory. Well, I do appreciate the help. I sure don't want to let this poor guy's death be in vain. He was probably only trying to help. I guess we're lucky we avoided whoever did this on the way here, but now going to find out whoever did it and return this data to the CDC. Benika hummed. The needles. You think he walked into a trap, or they jumped him? Ricky hadn't thought of it. They were from all different directions. I'd say he was ambushed, lured, or tricked somehow to where they could close the distance on him. I don't think they led him into something they manufactured that could do that. At least I hope not. Ricky grimaced as he imagined something shooting tons of used druggy needles full of who knows what into his body. They both shuddered, Benika thinking something similar at the same time. Benika, with her gloved hands, carefully pulled out each one of the needles and put them in a cardboard box she found, so hopefully nobody could get hurt on them. With some spray paint she found, she put a crude trio of outward-facing semicircles, joined by a circle in the middle. She hoped people would understand what that meant. Ricky found a shovel and dug as best of a grave as he could, and Benika finished going through his pockets to get his belongings to hand off to his friends if they hopefully found them. Ricky set him in the grave as respectfully as he could, then put some dirt over him and the plant that had been there before the research worker occupied the spot. With the scientists safely in the ground, they both silently vowed to be careful so they didn't get ambushed or have traps sprung on them. Chapter 13, Traveling Companions, late afternoon. The duo traveled silently, Ricky enjoying Benika's company and Benika having things on her mind that Ricky couldn't even guess. He resolved to focus extra hard for both of them so they wouldn't get trapped or ambushed. Ricky had tried to factor how long the walk would take, but he didn't think about it hard enough. They walked for an hour or two, then the sun started to set. Ricky decided to break the silence. Hey Benika, do you want to be traveling at night? Why, you can see well enough, can't you? Ricky thought about it. Well enough to see, but not if we had to fight off a moderate-sized mob. Ricky regretted not quite thinking this through earlier, then continued. I think we still have a few more miles until we're in their territory. We're sort of halfway now. In all likelihood, if we traveled together, it would be where the researcher got attacked. Ricky thought about the poor researcher traveling all this way, fearful for his life, tracked by druggy psychopaths. Or stalked? Stalked by druggy psychopaths. He thought in his head, who would attack people with tons of syringes and try to bite them? Ricky quickly pushed it out of his mind. Whoever these people were, they were going to go down hard. It was against everything he believed in. Benika broke the chain of thoughts and Ricky said, yes, let's find a place to hunker down. We'll enter their portion first thing in the morning. Maybe they'll still be sleeping and we can catch them fairly by surprise. Ricky let out a sigh of relief as quiet as he could. He hated being out at night without his hundreds of buddies helping him. Ricky reached his senses out and couldn't detect Benika's helpers either. She must have left hers back where they were to also take a sort of break. Benika grabbed Ricky's arms as he was lost in thought again and then led him in the expanding darkness into a house. This is a safe house I was staying in. She reached out with her senses. Everything seems untouched. She guided him to her hiding spot where they nestled in together for the night to stay warm. Sleep time. Moments later they were walking around as spirits as their bodies slept. It was a neutral sort of place. Nothing was going on around. The animals were up in the trees sleeping. Off in the distance to the north, it was quite a bit more sinister. Ricky wasn't sure why he hadn't noticed it when he originally came through here. Benika looked at him and seemed to understand. Ricky turned around to face where they came and saw Benika's aura in the distance to the south, where her little friends were operating. As foreign as it was to him, he still longed to return. This place didn't feel bad, but to the north definitely didn't feel right. Benika sensed his feelings again and held him tight. The comforting smell of licorice enveloped Ricky's body and he relaxed. They stared north into the dark place all night until it was time to wake up. Knowing whatever they face, at least they face it together. 14. Facing reality. Dawn. Next morning. Ricky and Benika both stirred at the same time and woke up. Ricky grinned at her stupidly, admiring her cute pointy nose, and her eyes glared at him from behind it. She shoved him away hard, and with that they both got up to start their day. The sun was starting to rise. They climbed out of the hiding place, Ricky going first. It was clear. Benika popped up after him, and they proceeded to carefully and quietly exit the house. It was quiet outside, and it sounded like birds were chirping, but further away than usual. Maybe the birds didn't like it here. Ricky had a pretty good idea why. He resolved himself once again that the tweaker crazies had to go. He looked over at Benika and she nodded. They both carefully and with as much awareness as they could muster headed north. Benika remembered she had 2 breakfast bars and she shared one with Ricky. It was really tasty and made any thought of hunger pains go away. They entered the tweakers area right on time as the sun crested the mountain range not so far away. There was no sign of traps, but that didn't mean there weren't any. Ricky would know if there were wires right away, but he didn't know about any pressure-sensitive devices. It was unsettling to be here. It drove Ricky's nerves crazy, like everything was moving at different frenetic speeds at the same time. Ricky resolved that he must have been so focused on escape and finding safety that he had completely blanked out how awful this place felt. He wanted to ask Benika if she remembered anything through here before, but decided it was a bad idea. It wasn't long before they came up on their first person. Benika noticed it first. They were laying on the ground acting like they were sleeping or unconscious. This immediately took Ricky aback, and he got his shotgun low and ready. He looked at Benika and she shook her head. She obviously didn't like this. Ricky remembered he had a pig axe and a bladed crowbar in his coat the whole time. He chuckled to himself how he could carry so much weight and always forgot about it. He tapped Benika on the shoulder and let his shotgun hang and held out the pig axe and bladed crowbar to her. She made an exaggerated motion of thinking super difficultly as to which she wanted. She took the pig axe, waved it around in the air a little bit, handed it back, and took the bladed crowbar. Her eyes lit up, and it appears as if they had found a winner. They both looked back at the person laying on the ground and saw from the sunlight that the person had several needles poking out of each of the abnormally long arms of their sleeves. Benika gave Ricky a wink, stealthily crept over to the person and bashed their brains in. Ricky didn't cringe at all, he only looked around to make sure nobody hopped out. Besides a single gasp of air, if the person felt anything, they didn't show it. They were clearly now released to their mortal coil and on to the next phase of existence where Ricky and Benika wouldn't have to deal with them anymore. Benika used her crowbar to carefully lift the person's clothing to see if they had an elaborate system of tubes. To see that they had an elaborate system of tubes, chemicals, and pumps attached to a rig on their body. They also appeared to have various lesions and diseases on their bodies, like they were fighting off multiple viral and bacterial infections at the same time. Ricky wondered if they were a carrier, but the research they found didn't look sick other than the horrible bite marks. Ricky gently tugged on Benika's clothing like a child would, trying to get her away from the body. He didn't trust that body, like it could get up any point despite there only being mush where a head used to be. She nodded, and they continued sneaking through the area, finding several more they stealthily dispatched. Ricky separating one from their head with the bladed portion of his tool and another in the back of the head with the claw end. Ricky decided the blade was the most effective and humane, if it could even be considered humane with whatever these abominations were. Benika's wasn't quite as heavy, but with the bladed portion she was still making do, having reached the same conclusion as Ricky had how to most efficiently dispatch these diseased psychos. The last one Ricky saw looked like its flesh had been mostly eaten off by a bacterium, Ricky mused to himself that this specific one must have tried to eat the freshwater clams and were trying to self-medicate with the street drugs to a horrible end. Obviously a variant of the mutated disease. Another looked like it had horrible insect bites that had been festering around like nothing he'd ever seen. Like the insects at some point had crawled into him and were living inside him and reproducing like a human mosquito host. The fruit trees in the area looked dead or dying, and there were no fruit-bearing bushes to be seen. Something was definitely wrong with this place. The duo picked up the pace as fast as they could. Either they would find the main nest of these dead souls, or they would find the CDC. Regardless of which opportunity happened first, they both vowed once again these people had to be removed from the population. Neither wanted to say it, but it was obvious what they'd been eating this entire time. They both swallowed hard with the grim reality, then continued walking. Things only continued to get worse. It wasn't long before they found a group of the druggies that were awake and alert. Apparently the shells of people they'd got through so far were some kind of sleeper cell ambush sentries. Ricky looked at Beninka for a few moments, and then they both nodded. Beninka quietly sucked away and expertly climbed a tree. Ricky waited for her to get into position, then moved out into the clearing, his shotgun and pickaxe hidden in his cloak. "Hey, have you guys seen a researcher around here? I'm out looking for them. They were a friend of mine." The sickos all looked at each other, and then the apparent leader yelled gibberish. The entire group of 12 or so rushed Ricky from about 20 yards away. They were all fast on their drugs, but Ricky was faster. He whipped out his shotgun and center mass nailed the closest guy. Being loaded with birdshot from his encounters with the city-state security team, a crater vaporized into the first guy Ricky shot at, splattering liquid from the creature's internal pump everywhere. In a fraction of a second, the bolt automatically flew back, picked up a new round, and then slammed forward, and with a trigger pull each time duplicated the situation as needed. As this happened, every other head, including the sub-leader, turned into mist. Ricky wasn't counting shots in the chaos and clicked. As the last person was about to close the distance, Ricky twisted and got his pickaxe out in time to catch the would-be attacker across the knee and dodge his fall as the momentum carried the person forward into the ground. A final shot rang out from the tree a second later, and the bad guy's head ceased to exist. Not taking any chances, Ricky reloaded with buckshot from his sling. He would save the slug on his side saddle for last. Ricky finished loading, racked the charging handle, then put in a final round of buckshot. He looked around and didn't see anyone. Ricky looked up at Beninka and she nodded back down at him, also not seeing anyone. She shuffled herself sideways, curled her stomach around the tree branch, flipped upside down, and kept a hold on the branch, extended her body, and let herself drop. She brushed herself off, and Ricky clapped for her excitedly. She was clearly proud of herself and was showing off, but Ricky didn't care. He was geeking out, and it was a pretty cool move as far as he was concerned. "You haven't seen anything yet," she said to him with a wink as she walked up to him. Ricky noticed the way she walked and decided he really liked the way she walked. It was breaking his concentration, though, and he tried best to cover her as she loaded new rounds in her mag. As soon as she was done, then they moved on, so they wouldn't be easy to lock down in a single position. In the direction of the CDC they went. Silently, a drone flies overhead, watching the situation unfold. Chapter 15, Fortress Sieged. Afternoon. Ricky and Beninka continued forward block by block, covering left and right. After the short battle, they had been able to take a moment to center themselves and felt the strong negative presence ahead of them. There were faint sounds in the distance of slamming and controlled single gunfire. Both Ricky and Beninka agreed what they'd ran into was only a small camp. There'd likely be a big nest of them and a larger raiding party. The conclusion was that these people had eaten sick dogs when they were starving. The dogs were sick from also starving and consumed contaminated items that they'd gotten into. Upon running out of dogs, they turned on each other, getting sicker and sicker. Already being used to different forms of street drugs, they mixed the drugs together to try to combat the virus. As this was happening, they continued getting more malnourished as the plants mysteriously died off that were naturally producing food, and the mosquitoes started biting people, causing additional mutations. Then the remaining starving dogs would eat them, getting sicker, and then the starving people would eat the dogs, and it got worse and worse. Mumps and measles made their way back, along with an increasingly slight variant of the flu. Nobody could stay hydrated enough due to the water being contaminated with cercarial dermatitis and giardia. So, not only were the people dehydrated over the winter from the flu, but the water was making them sicker. They would bathe in the water, making them sicker. They tried to eat contaminated snails or clams, and they'd get even more sick than the dog virus situation. Rabies or whatever it was. People die, everyone starving would consume them, repeating the process, the mosquitoes everywhere, ensuring that this would be the end. The city-states were insulated, as they wouldn't let anyone in. The various farm strongholds were safe, because if they let anyone, there'd be a 30-day decontamination, isolation, quarantine period. The people on the outside kept getting sicker and sicker, and while there were rumors of how to deal with the doggy disease, nothing was in the works for the rest. With the new lake where the valley used to be, the mosquitoes and waterborne viruses were only getting worse. Ricky and Benika quietly shared their ideas with each other as they headed closer and closer to the ruckus. There'd been the occasional person still lying in wait for them, which they would quietly dispatch, but it wasn't long before they found the issue. They walked through a clearing, and across a huge parking lot was a sole building. The building looked like it was built like a bank vault. There were around 50 psycho druggies trying to smash their way in, with more attracted by the noise from the ensuing area. Still in disbelief, Ricky asked himself out loud how they missed these people on the way through the first time. Benika responded, likely wondering the same question. Guess we were lucky and quiet. Ricky nodded and quietly said, let's make sure these psychos never hurt anyone ever again. Benika nodded and patted him on the shoulder, happy she'd found someone that wasn't afraid to do the right thing to help out others. Ricky looked at her and nodded, and she nodded back and then scurried up a tree. Ricky began circling around to the building, trying to get a full appreciation for what was going on. A shot would occasionally ring out as someone from on top of the research center would crank off a heavy-sounding round. Someone in the parking lot would go down with a missing head. The sound of a bolt coming up, back, forward, and down again would be heard between shots. Someone up there was enjoying this, but probably knew there was no end to the situation by himself. Ricky looked around, and there was a car revving back, then ramming forward into the building. A rigged-together ramp of sorts was enabling the car to overcome the stairs obstacle. The two giant potted plants had been moved out of the way, and the pillars didn't provide any additional protection from vehicles the size of a car. Ricky wasn't sure how long the doors could last, as enforced as they likely were. Nothing lasted forever, and there was infinite cars around to try to smash through the front of the building with. These crazies could have tried looking through each of the cars for a key card to try to get through, but Ricky imagined their protocols locked down. Probably so well done that nobody would ever leave a key pass in their vehicle where someone could steal it. He imagined every employee had to badge themselves in, that every extra card would be accounted for or deactivated if someone left the company. He hoped. Ricky knew he couldn't fight them all alone. He had maybe 15 to 20 rounds of buckshot and 8 slugs. For the buckshot to be most effective, he needed to be within 30 yards. He needed a distraction or diversion to lure them in. As he was thinking, another one of their heads exploded. 49 more to go, and with that thought several more came in from the forest on the other side. Ricky figured maybe that's where their main base was, but there was no way to know. He could as easily accidentally walk into it on the side he was on. Ricky was hopelessly outnumbered, even with Benika watching him. But what choice was there? These psychos couldn't be allowed to take over the outlying areas of the state. It wouldn't be safe for Ricky or Benika or even little Martina at their stronghold. Eventually these psychos would come for them. If they could overrun one of the most defensible structures like this, what chance did anyone else have? Ricky did the only thing that came to mind. He hid in the brush and started making a dying animal noise. Ricky didn't know what kind of animal noise to make or what size to pretend he would be, so he took a bush with one hand and a tree branch with the other. He did the best impression of a dying animal he could. After a couple of branch swishing, he realized that as high as they were on whatever, that who knows what it would sound like to them. It got one or two's attention, then three or four. The car battering ram stopped, and then slowly people started making their way over across the parking lot. They were still 100 yards away, which was too far. Ricky kept making his dying animal racket, but didn't make himself sound too strong, or like there was more than one. He didn't want to scare everyone off, after all. Ricky couldn't make up his mind whether to sound like a moose or a chicken, and then realized he hadn't heard what other animals sounded like for a while besides birds, so it ended up sounding like a crow. When he got the bulk of their attention, Ricky quietly shifted back into the brush. He silently waited, and the sniper from the roof stopped firing, probably also curious. A momentary calm washed over the parking lot suddenly, and even with all the modified street drugs and the crazy system, they still seemed to know something exciting was about to happen. The first husks of people broke the forest line and were nearly looking directly at Ricky, but still not putting two and two together. He had no idea exactly what their mind had framed to be looking for, but he wasn't it with his shorter stature and stocky frame. Ricky could tell their eyes could focus, though, because they recognized the barrel leveled at them. However, by then it was too late for the husks. 8+1 emptied very quick, and 9 bodies crumpled in the forest. Craters appeared where corrupted flesh was seconds earlier. Ricky dived under a log he was positioned to as improvised weapons and a few bullets flew wild over his head. Ricky immediately began reloading slugs as 2 heavier rifles started shooting down into the crowd in the parking lot that didn't commit to breaking the forest line. The bolt clicking of the guy on the roof as he popped crazy heads like it was an art form to him, and a matter of pride. The second rifle, Benika's, shredding people at the front, trying to give Ricky a break so he could reload. Within moments, it seemed like Benika and the guy on the roof were having a contest to see which could get blood splattered in the other's direction as Ricky popped back up to dump slugs into whoever was left. 3 more were in the forest line, and Ricky got all 3 as they were looking where he previously was. Giant holes now in their chests where drug-infused body used to be. Ricky tactically reloaded whatever shells he could find into his shotgun to keep it topped off, knowing he didn't have many shells left, or even knowing what the shells contained. Some of the shells seemed to be the wrong colors, and he remembered there being a miscellaneous box he loaded at the bottom of the bandolier with. Several more tweaker junkies broke into the forest trying to escape the sniping contest going outside, and Ricky introduced each one to a gigantic slug out of his rifled barrel. It was like hitting each of them with a 50 caliber miniature cannonball at 1800 feet per second. All the drugs in the world weren't going to keep these tweakers going. While the entry wound was already substantial, they had baseball hole sizes coming out their exits as they fell near Ricky. He kept reloading as fast as he could, finishing off his slugs into the immediate risks as more entered the forest. One he shot in the face, but the round didn't immediately go off. Not anticipating this, Ricky was already onto the next target with a flechette round that shredded the person. As he was screaming, Ricky went to the prior target, who was closing in wondering what happened. Right as Ricky was in range of the psycho's machete, his face exploded. He began running around screaming, thinking his head was on fire before he finally fell. The second target kept coming at Ricky as Ricky racked the charging handle of his shotgun. The guy had deep cuts all over him but seemed to not feel the pain. The next round from Ricky's gun was super bright in the shadowed forest as magnesium burned off and set the psycho on fire. Ricky realized he had a hatchet when he dropped it and began running around, tripping out. The psycho ran face first into a tree and knocked himself out cold, still on fire. Ricky slammed the rest of the ammo into the magazine tube and checked the chamber, which had a round in it, thankfully, although what the round was, Ricky had no idea. Hopefully it was something good. Looked like a 3-inch shell. In fact, the rest did. Some of the crazies were crawling around, not realizing they were mortally wounded from all the drugs they were on. Ricky went and finished each of them off rightly with his pickaxe, so they would feel no more pain. When he was all done, he carefully snuck out to the tree line and yelled, "Don't shoot! Don't shoot! It's me! Please don't shoot!" Despite not being able to see her, Ricky felt Beninka try to cover him by keeping her rifle pointed at the other sniper. The two were likely pointing their rifles at each other and not at him at this point. Nobody alive was left in the parking lot. It looked like the blood spattered each direction was fairly equal. Ricky mused that the person with the bolt gun had started intentionally hitting vital organs to cause maximum blood loss so they could win the little sniper off the two had been having. Soon a voice yelled down from the top of the building in a voice that didn't sound like it came someone above 20 years old. "Go ahead, you're fine. I won't shoot if you aren't bad guys." Ricky was amazed. Just a kid, he thought to himself. A boy, now a man, due to all of these horrible circumstances. Ricky walked out into the clearing and started checking bodies. He felt Benika's hesitation and didn't mind. She was the most important anyway and had to stay safe, Ricky confirmed to himself. Ricky looked around and made sure no more crazies were going to come out of the clearing. He wished he had an optic, but usually relied on his friends to relay situational awareness. Ricky tried to reach out with his senses, but there was too much death and frenetic energy scrambling him. He needed to rest. Hopefully the two snipers would direct their rifles off each other and scan the forest line now to make sure nobody was going to ambush them. Ricky looked at the car and the person had got out of it to be a part of the rush. Ricky thanked himself that they hadn't thought to slam the car into the forest. Maybe their tweaker brains thought it would scare away the dying creature or whatever. Either way, Ricky got in the vehicle and put it in neutral and pushed it away. He didn't want to get in that car. Who knew if there were hidden needle traps? Once the vehicle was pushed away enough, Ricky took the keys and threw them at the door of the building. They bounced off the shatterproof window material and clattered onto the concrete. The sound like so much change falling out of a pocket when you're in the middle of trying to cross a parking lot and all the cars are waiting for you. While Ricky waited for everyone to relax from the situation, he looked at the bodies. The skin was ravaged from parasite and insect attacks. Some of them were malformed from something that seemed to attack their DNA and bone structure. Some had people bite marks, and they all had many injection sites. Ricky didn't like it at all, as people messing with synthetics were so dangerous and unpredictable. He remembered the gangs in the city selling stuff like that before the collapse, when the separatists wiped the gangs out that wouldn't ally up. Ricky guessed this area was where the bulk of the production originated. Ricky couldn't be concerned about the production operations now. He needed to get into that building because it wouldn't be safe out here for long. He backed up a bit and tried to look up to the roof, but couldn't see where the sniper was. Ricky walked out to the windows and peered inside. Everything looked nice and neat inside, but he couldn't see anyone. He imagined nearly everything being underground. He saw himself in the reflection and realized he looked silly. He made a few faces until he found one that made him chuckle. Ricky then went back to a serious face and saw an attractive girl walking towards him in the reflection. He turned around and there was Benika and her little rat pal, looking around frantically. "Are they gonna let us inside?" she inquired, trying to not sound nervous. "Not sure," Ricky said, also trying to not sound nervous. Benika got behind a pillar and started digging through her bag. She set out with a smartphone, a USB stick, and grabbed the ammo and started reloading her couple of magazines as fast as she could. Ricky shuffled over and picked up the USB stick and smartphone and looked at them. With one in each hand, he started walking over to the windows, holding the two objects up to wherever he thought a security camera might be looking. He walked from one side of the front office to the other, trying to show the two objects wherever he could. A few moments went by and the doors didn't unlatch. He didn't even want to bother trying them, as they would be solid and he didn't want to startle the inhabitants. He walked from one side of the front office to the other, trying to show the two objects wherever he could. A few moments went by and the doors didn't unlatch. He didn't want to even bother trying them. Oh. Apologies, I just read that. Ricky put the objects in his pocket and looked around at the bodies outside. They were diseased. He imagined if they weren't so dangerous to touch, he might use them somehow as a warning. The people inside must not want them as samples, or they'd already be out here probably against their own better judgment. Scientists were weird like that. Maybe Ricky would keep a single one or two or three. He wasn't sure. He wasn't good at science stuff. With it seeming like nobody was going to let the two in, he decided The next smartest things to do was to dispose of the bodies. Beninka was busy loading mags and didn't seem to mind Ricky puttering around. He saw in his peripheral she was watching him, but she would turn away if he got too close to obviously notice. He didn't mind, so he decided to work. Chapter 16, Cleanup, Evening. He looked around the parking lot and there was a shopping cart from some other grocery nearby that the psychos had been using for whatever. Elsewhere around the parking lot he found a shovel one of them had been using as an improvised weapon. Ricky dug through all of his pockets until he found his gloves, put them on, and got to work. The first few bodies fit on the bottom shelf of the cart, which Ricky scooped up with a shovel. He carted them over to the center of the parking lot away from everything and piled them up. Beninka stretched out on the steps of the massive building of the thick stone walls and watched him work, periodically scanning the forest line for threats. 2 bodies at a time, sometimes 3, if he could hoist one on the top. Ricky moved the diseased bodies. He set one aside that looked different, in case the scientists wanted samples. He tried to get one of each type on issues that he could differentiate. The rest kept going on the pile. None of them were moving. When he got to his in the forest, he kept the heads in the top basket and scooped them up using the shovel. It was a quiet and dry evening. The rain didn't seem to want to get going, which was unusual for this time of year, but not ultra rare. It helped Ricky's cleanup efforts. When he was all done, it could rain to its heart's content and hopefully clean away this horrific scene somewhat. Thinking about the calmness of the parking lot and the cooling of the air, Ricky started to smell the gore and realized how disturbing of a situation it was. There were over 50 bodies piled up in the parking lot with a nest that Ricky had made so the heads wouldn't go rolling off. He imagined how comedic it would be if he was chasing a rolling head around with a shovel and trying to fight back cracking up. He wondered if their insanity was somehow contagious and decided he needed to stop any procrastination so this could get expedited. He felt Beninka getting concerned for him, and so he backed away from the body pile, which was about as high as him and as wide as a car in each direction. Ricky stared at it for a few minutes, trying not to see his methods as a giant failure of society, but as the final task to honor these people's prior humanity, he needed to get this pile on fire somehow, but obviously they wouldn't spontaneously combust on their own. Ricky thought for a second of what was flammable, then remembered the vehicle was running, presumably on gas. The problem was that Ricky didn't have a way to get the gas out of the tank. Ricky tried to solve the problem, but had no way of siphoning the tank. He could look around for a garden hose, but it would be dangerous for many reasons. He had no way of tipping the car over. Ricky briefly considered putting a rag in it and soaking the rag and lighting the car on fire, but that sounded really dangerous. He also had no container to hold the gasoline in. Ricky looked down at the bodies and saw the blood was all starting to slowly run down one direction, the direction that gravity was pulling it. The parking lot was slanted very slightly, and this gave Ricky an idea. Ricky went to the car and put it back in neutral and pushed it all the way back to the pile of the bodies so that the rear of the car on the gas tank side was the closest to the bodies. He caught a glimpse of Beninka facepalming. Ricky grinned to himself, being so smart, although he thought to himself he had to be really careful to not spark it when he did this. He knew the gas would be old, so the flashpoint wouldn't be amazing, but it should work. I mean, the vehicle had been able to start, right? Ricky took his pickaxe and set it under the car and carefully wedged it in with the heavy-duty forks on the other side pressed firmly against the concrete, then used leverage. The weight of the car was his own downfall, and the bladed edge carefully and slowly punctured the soft fuel tank. Little bits of metal splintered from the demo axe, but the softer metal of the fuel tank gave way regardless. The gasoline started to flow exactly as planned, but unfortunately it was running right through his shoes and into the pile O bodies. Ricky gritted his teeth and gently unseated his axe, then gingerly walked out of the path of the fuel. It quickly evaporated out of his shoes and poured out. Ricky hoped there would... Hold on. Continued pouring out. Ricky hoped there would be enough to complete this task thoroughly. He stood back several more steps, then turned to give a thumbs up to Beninka. She didn't seem to have a response, like she was lost in thought. He thought to himself he could strike his axe against the pavement on the other side to hopefully ignite the fuel once it was empty, but no idea if it would actually work. He figured if he kept smacking the pavement enough, it'd eventually spark, but until the tank was empty, he would wait. The clothes of the deceased crazies soaked up quite a bit of the fuel before it started streaming past. Ricky tried to figure out other ways to capture the fuel so as much could be allocated to the task as possible. He had no intention of going anywhere near the bodies due to the concealed needles and disease, and went and popped the trunk of the car to see maybe if there was some fabric inside. The trunk opened easily, and Ricky got away from the trail of fuel again. The trunk was full of clothes and tons of different people's checkbooks and credit cards. Ricky thought to himself it was getting very hard to find anything redeemable about these people, but he assured himself they weren't all originally this way. Many of them were as much victims on some level as they were predators, even though they all ultimately did have a choice at some point. Ricky picked up his shovel and carefully shoveled clothes onto the fuel, escaping the other side of the bodies. He didn't dare reach in and grab in case there were any traps. He imagined at some level in this trunk could be an entire stash of more needles. There was no way to know. Ricky kept piling more checkbooks and clothes onto the fuel on the other side until he made a good barrier. Ricky started pulling up into the pile more, and Ricky stepped back again. The sun began to set, and Ricky felt the temperature beginning to drop more. He looked at the fuel, and it stopped pouring out of the tank and seemed to be at a drip. There wouldn't be enough to explode the vehicle anymore, thankfully. To make sure the car wouldn't be damaged in any way by the heat, Ricky pushed the car safely away and put the parking brake on. Ricky turned around from his completed mini-task, and Benika was standing behind him as silently as a shadow. She took her gloves off and put them in her pocket and looked at him, nodding. He took his gloves off and put them in his pocket and looked at her, wondering what the next step of their plan was. She reached up and flinched, subconsciously expecting to get smacked again. Benika reached up and Ricky flinched, subconsciously expecting to get smacked again. Benika giggled, took Ricky's hand, and walked him back to the pile of diseased refuse until they were about 20 feet away. Out of her pocket, she withdrew a fist of checkbooks from the trunk of the car and a zippy lighter. The lighter was hand-painted white with a black skull on it. Benika lit a checkbook for each of them and handed one to Ricky. As the sun finished setting, they toasted their checkbooks to each other, then tossed them on the pile, both finding fumes and igniting the pile. Ricky got an idea and pushed the car back so it was close enough to the fire to watch, but far enough so they wouldn't get burned. He set the e-brake, then sat on the hood with his back against the windshield. Benika smoothly and silently walked over to the car, hopped on, and scooted into his jacket and under his arm, the sweet aroma of licorice gently soothing Ricky. As Benika curled up to him, they watched the corpses burn far into the night and accidentally dozed off in the bonfire in moonlight. They napped soundly for a while, the immediate area finally feeling at peace. The nap was about to move into deep sleep when Ricky and Benika were startled by shuffling in the parking lot. Scientists were scurrying around taking samples as the fire burned, still having several hours left in it to complete its cleansing task. Both had eyes open, but trying not to startle the scientists, who surely had been through a lot. It seemed like the front of the building had its own floodlights, which were illuminating the situation in the parking lot. Ricky and Benika were positioned in a way to where they were in a shadow of the building so the lights hadn't caused the two notice. Ricky looked up slowly when he thought the scientists weren't looking in their direction and saw people poking and prodding at the people he had set aside for them. There were others collecting bones from the pile with special tools. One scientist looked to be fighting with a crow that wanted something silver on the body's jacket. The crow began to get the upper hand in the tug-of-war, and the person gave up and gave the crow the object, who then flew off, satisfied. Neither could think of a particularly good way to start the conversation, then Ricky remembered. "We have your guys' smartphone USB stick we recovered from one of your researchers." Ricky had tried to cram the message all out as fast as he could, so he skipped the formalities. Several looked like they wanted to run back inside without even thinking. Others didn't know what to do and looked towards someone who must have been their informal leader. A lot of pain sounded in their voice. "He was very brave. May I ask what happened to him?" "I assume you two didn't." Ricky responded, "No, we didn't do anything to hurt him. He escaped these psychos and collapsed near our area. We were unable to..." Ricky trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "We did get his research data, though. We thought you'd want it." Ricky hopped off the car to hand them the recovered equipment. Beninka instinctively rolled with sudden motion and landed gracefully on the concrete. Ricky instantly regretted the movement, realizing Beninka was still curled up with him and he hadn't taken her into consideration. The scientists scattered and started scuttling toward the building as fast as they could, shuffle in their various protective equipment. North a mile or two, several large explosions went off and at least 8 different rifles started firing. A shuffling was heard on the top of the roof as presumably the sniper that Ricky had completely forgot about switched positions to investigate the commotion in the night. Come inside quietly," the supervisor said. From around 30 feet away, Ricky noticed the other scientists were already inside, but he couldn't see far because the light was now in his face. Ricky grabbed Beninka's hand and the 3 rushed to the building as safely as they could. The building was already shut and locked, but the supervisor swiped his card and in they went. Within a second, the outside floodlights shut off, and in the night, the bonfire kept doing its job. The trio ran around some walls, through a hallway, and got into an elevator. As the door closed, all the lights on the floor shut off, and down they went, way down. The lights flickered in the elevator, and Ricky got punched hard in the shoulder. His body barely rocked, but he definitely felt it. Ricky apologized to Beninka and then got a big hug under his jacket that didn't let go. Ricky smiled as the light flickered as they continued their descent. Chapter 17, Busy Bees, the CDC lab underground, late night time. The elevator reached its predestined stopping point and the doors swished open. The room felt pressurized and sterile to Ricky, although when he looked around, everyone was in normal lab attire instead of protective suits. Everyone ignored Ricky and Beninka and continued with their business. The supervisor that rode down with them put his hands out to Ricky and made an upsetting face. Ricky apologized for their loss and handed over the USB stick, phone, ID badge, and wallet. "This is all he had, sorry." "It's okay, we do appreciate it. We deactivated his credentials when he didn't come back on time, but we hadn't feared the worst. At least he didn't get turned into one of them." Beninka and Ricky nodded. "Come take a look at what we're doing. You've been out there and already seen this much, then you can crash if you want. Staying one night shouldn't contaminate anything too bad. What they have isn't contagious person to person anyway. It's shared intravenously and through insects. Obviously the insects ignore both of you due to lavender, chamomile, and licorice. Pretty ingenious you two coming up with that, actually." The lead researcher took some notes. Beninka and Ricky looked at each other and shrugged. Beninka flashed Ricky a subtle grin. The research supervisor handed off the USB stick and mobile device and handed it off to an admin. Handed them off to an admin. "Hey, sync this up, would you? Pretty important." The admin nodded and prioritized the task. Ricky looked around and noticed everyone was working like the area hadn't been collapsed for 3 years or however long it's been. His eyes bugged out a little and Beninka smacked him to pay attention. The research lead was explaining about all the different viruses. Something about Giardia and a parasite in the water and malaria and Zika, an advanced form of Zika. The scientist guy was going on and Ricky was very fatigued. He needed his little rat nap, or he was going to fall apart any time now and be useless. The supervisor looked at Ricky and saw he was getting loopy. "Oh hey, some fresh water will clear that right up. Then you can crash if you want." The lead researcher had another admin grab them a few water bottles and said to take them to the prior researcher's room. "He'd want y'all to have it. You're welcome to stay till morning then. I got a favor to ask. A few, actually." Ricky thought returning favors sounded like a good idea. They got to the room and he slammed the water bottle down. Ricky barely made it to bed, a real bed, before passing out. He subconsciously was aware of someone kicking him around, trying to adjust the covers, then crawling in with him. Then he slept like a log, peaceful hums of the lab going on in the background like a distant ocean. Chapter 18. Job to do. Early next morning. Ricky woke to getting poked with a stick. He swatted it away a few times before grabbing it and swinging it around, trying to whack whatever had been poking him. He adjusted his body to get extra swinging range and then remembered he was in a real bed. Ricky's eyes abruptly opened and then scanned to see who was swinging a stick at. The stick ended up being a metal testing rod, which he handed back to the admin, who had been trying to get knocked out by it. "Sorry, we'd been knocking for a while, but you were out, and it was my job to wake you, and I have to." Yeah, it's fine, kiddo. What's up?" "Management requests your attendance at the morning meeting in 30 minutes. Do you accept the meeting invite?" Question mark. Ricky raised an eyebrow as he felt like he was somehow talking to an email meeting calendar. "Yep, meeting accepted, thanks." The intern threw a pair of fresh towels on the bed and then scurried out with his metal instrument, shutting the door behind him before he got whacked again for good measure. Ricky couldn't remember how long it had been since he'd taken a real shower. He checked the bathroom and there was a full set of amenities. Ricky lamented the prior owner couldn't be here anymore, but everything happened for a reason, Ricky supposed. Ricky got smacked from behind as Benika shoved her way past him into the bathroom and then literally kicked him out and playfully shut the door on his face. An hour later, the two found their way into the conference room via an admin that was waiting for them. In the room at the oval table was all various kinds of diverse researchers. Some looked like horticulturists, others maybe like their special skills were in anatomy. One looked like a pediatrician and another looked like a pharmacist. One in the corner looked like a sniper. He had an absurdly oversized bolt-action rifle that looked bigger than him with a scope half the size of the rifle. The kid, who didn't look a day over 20, put both fingers up at Ricky and pretended to take a shot at him. Ricky pretended to die, and then Benika pretended to use Ricky as a shooting platform and shot back at the marksman prodigy with her fingers. This gave the kid a huge smile, and he gave her a thumbs up. The whole interaction seemed to be lost on the scientists as they were humming and hawing about 15 different strategies. They were all equally important and could happen in parallel, but all still needed their own unique assignments and tasks. One researcher mentioned this is what they could hopefully rely on the two contractors for. Ricky guessed they meant him and Benika. He turned to look at her with a stupid grin, and she appeared to be glowing. This made Ricky grin more, and he got a stern look from her. Then she started reapplying her black makeup in the middle of the meeting. The researchers talked about some kind of artificial kill switch the genetically modified plant companies had developed. There were already triggers that could kill the plant companies' genetically modified plants every year if the farmers didn't comply with their ever-increasing demands. The failsafe doubled as a contingency if the plants, for some reason, fought back and decided to reproduce despite the genetic coding the genetic companies had installed on the food-producing plants. The companies claimed it was all legal to protect their investments in trademark products, which were really plants that everyone should have access to. The companies made further claims that since their plants were so much better performance, they were clearly a different product. With huge donations to lawmakers legally via lobbyists and zero transparency, the idiots kept voting in. This all got passed with flying colors. As soon as the genetics companies found out how to make a kill switch for their own products, it was simple to reverse it and kill all the other plants once the next law went through. The law was that everyone who had a grandfathered plant in was supposed to be safe, but they were encouraged to voluntarily hand over their plants to get a new genetically modified one. Conveniently, of course, they had to pay a yearly subscription fee for the privilege of owning one of these modified, safer, better plants. A lot of people had already handed in their plants, being told that these new plants are so much better and improved. Others, though, realize that you can't force genetic enhancements onto wildlife without unforeseen circumstances, one of which is health issues for the consumer, and others, traceability if there was an issue, since the foods weren't as easily traceable back to a source. This was convenient whenever there was a health issue. Whereas old plants weren't as easily traceable, the new genetic ones were. Therefore, calling it a safety and traceability issue sounded good, but it was solving an issue that only existed due to genetically modified foods to begin with. People always wanted gun background checks, for example, despite the low amount of credible instances per year. But nobody would pass food background checks. This was all despite the wholesale health issues that continued to go unexplained with GMO food. People still kept water around despite drownings. People kept aborting babies in unmeasurable amounts, but nobody on either side of the political spectrum cared about what they were ingesting. One side said it would cripple organic farms, which of course was a lie. The other side had so many people saying it was so unimportant that would drive food prices up so high. The alarmists scared everyone into not daring... Oh, hold on. Shoot. One side said it would cripple organic farms, which of course was a lie. The other side had so many people saying it was so unimportant and would drive food prices up so high. Okay, sorry, apologize. The alarmist scared everyone into not daring to vote in to see where the food actually came from quality control. For quality control. Meanwhile, the same believed jets, which had moisture coming off their wings, was going to kill everyone. The same people that thought that vaccines were going to make everyone mentally handicapped, but got their useless flu shots every year. Meanwhile, things like the Zika virus actually were messing people up, but nobody took extra precautions while it got handled by the powers that be. Ricky thought about the massive hypocrisy and was so happy he didn't have to put up with it anymore. But Inca glared at him. He'd been trailing off in his mind. So, to combat the Zika virus, what we have to do is... They talked about everything they needed to for malaria and Zika and the parasites, and integrated with the cure they already had for the dog virus. They'd got with help from some other contractors. It would all travel on some modified mosquitoes that could go provide the antidotes for everything human-related. The good mosquitoes would go mate with the bad ones and share all of the cures with them, and then go bite everybody and cure them. With a few generations of the mosquitoes, everything bad should be eradicated, and the cure would work its way out of the mosquitoes and then go back to normal with the diseases all being destroyed. Another guy came up and talked about some bees he had that could go find all the plants and save them before summer hit and the kill switch triggered. He said that the bees were neutral, so they should join any hive and start sharing the little antibodies on their furry bodies when they rubbed against each other, the other bees in the hives that they would visit. Each bee would go find bees in the wild and rub up against them to get their scent, and then follow them back to the nest and rub on all the bees in the hallways of the hive. Before long, all the plants they find should have the coating undone for the company that the company had already been using its own bees for. Yeah, it was supposed to look like an accident, like, oops, all your plants died, guess you should have went with our superior plants. When in reality it's the native plants that naturally become stronger, while plants coming off the assembly line will all die to the next thing that comes around if they aren't updated with the latest and greatest threats. Ricky thought to himself how the flu vaccine never worked, but how antivirus and anti-malware software on computers had to be meticulously updated by huge support offices. He reasoned that if you have to sit there and try to maintain something by hand isn't self-sustaining, then it will inevitably fail. Why would people rely on things like that to secure food and life? Ricky realized he zoned back out again and started listening. He was hoping this would be done soon. So all we're doing is resetting the code with our untainted bees, another researcher asked. Okay, you two got all that? It's super important. Ricky hadn't been thinking about the actual plan too much. It was a lot to take in. Yeah, what stops the frogs from eating all the mosquitoes? There seems to be a ton of frogs around the new lake. The researchers all looked at each other. Ricky realized he tipped over most of the frog-safe places where the mosquitoes would breed already. Can you guys make something where these mosquitoes can breed for a few weeks without getting eaten by the frogs? Then they should be able to reproduce enough to be fine once they meet up with the other local mosquitoes. Then half the stuff will be cured when they get in the water and the rest from their biting people. Ricky honestly had no idea if it'd work or not, but he had pretty much checked out. Sure, build house for mosquitoes, release bees. Anything else? They all looked at each other unsure if he actually got it or not, and they realized it was pretty much that simple. Yes, but it's very important. This is going to cure or destroy nearly every disease. Another quipped, except tetanus, of course. A corner of them chuckled to each other. Ricky imagined that the people stepping on rusty nails probably killed off a significant chunk of the population after the collapse. Beninka rolled her eyes. Are we done, kiddies? Things to do, right? Beninka had apparently finished putting on her war paint and went from her attractive pasty white face from the lack of sun in the region to looking like a light, absorbent assassin that hides in the shadows waiting to put a knife in you. Ricky tried to make as serious of a face as he could to echo Beninka and support her sentiment. Nobody said anything a moment, then the lead researcher motioned the two teams to get them the bees and mosquitoes. Someone in the corner mentioned that they feel like they were forgetting to tell the duo something but couldn't remember what. Ricky and Beninka were thanked for everything they did, and out they went. Ricky with a cage of bees and Beninka with mosquitoes. Chapter 19, Journey, Morning. It was nice outside. There was a cool breeze. It had eventually cooled down and there had been a lot of drizzle. A pile of bones lay out in the parking lot. The duo did a 360 before they left and saw thick black smoke billowing out several miles further to the north. No crazies had been in sight, and Ricky sensed that they were being covered by the sniper kid. He waved behind him and a laser blinked twice on his hand. Away the two went, back to their new little homes, to the south by the new lake. Ricky had forgot what the real plan was with the bees, but came up with his own idea. He figured he would release a few bees every couple miles. That way, they would get to where they needed to go. When he got back to camp, he would see if the little girl would come back, and he could give the rest of the bees to her. Hopefully their stronghold could figure out what to do with the rest. The territory outside the health science building felt a lot more lighthearted. There didn't seem to be any new bad guys to be found. The pre-existing bad guys were all being picked on by birds. Ricky and Beninka did their best to steer clear, and Ricky hoped the birds couldn't somehow catch the viruses. They did see one crow with a syringe in its mouth, trying to stab other birds that were trying to take it away from him. It eventually got the other birds away far enough and then flew off, very pleased with itself. Ricky couldn't help but wonder if the crows were building something, but tried to push it out of his mind. For some reason, a giant death spaceship appeared in his mind, shooting infected needles. He shook his head, trying to push the thought out. Beninka looked at him like he was being weird. He turned and looked at her with his goofy face, and she snickered. Ricky let a few more bees out. They took off like little doves in each direction to find new happy bee homes. Back the duo went into neutral territory. It looked like it was going to be a nice day again. In the distance, they sensed getting closer back into rat-controlled territory. It would be good to be home. Chapter 20, Good Times. Back in rat territory the coming weeks, into the summer. Beninka and Ricky got back into their territory to see that the rats got bored without the two around and started relaxing. Lots of new baby rats were expected and many new food ideas were found. There was rhubarb and onions and potatoes and pretty much unlimited supply of termites. It seemed that people had left some onions and potatoes in the ground and they kept reproducing in secret underground. When the new veggies popped up, the bees got to them and made sure they would be okay from there on forward. Ricky made a special safe swimming pool for the special mosquitoes that worked out well. For extra protection, he dug a mud pit in a pond where the captured frogs would go get put back into. It was away from the mosquitoes, so they could all get ready properly for when it warmed up. Ricky didn't know exactly how to introduce them to water, so he set their cage in the water. That helped them to reach relatively the same temperature and acclimate properly, sort of like fish. Ricky thought he was pretty smart, and when it was finally ready, he dumped the mosquitoes into the water. The adults flew away to parts unknown, and the juveniles and eggs all went into the still water and seemed to do fine. The little girl took care of Ricky's plants really well, which made Ricky happy. While he was gone. She eventually came back, and he handed her the box of remaining bees to take back to her base, as she called it. He explained that they were special bees, and that the adults would know what to do with them. Ricky suggested to her that they let a few go in their base and then try to share the bees around with their friends. He tried to explain how the plants needed these new bees, but didn't do a very good job. She explained nothing of theirs was growing and asked if this was why. He also said that their beehive was nearly wiped out and maybe this would fix it. The conversation seemed to make sense to her. Kid logic was awesome. Ricky knew he could trust her with the rest of the bees, and off she went. Beninka was proud of him for being so likable to the kid. She always tried to hide when the kid would come, but one day Martina said, "Who is the sad lady?" Ricky thought for a second and didn't know who Martina was talking about. As if Martina knew that Ricky was confused. "The gal in the corner, who is she?" Ricky looked around and saw Beninka, then looked back at Martina and responded, "She is very shy. You understand, don't you?" Martina nodded. "Maybe sometimes she'd like to go look at spiderwebs with me or something. They're very pretty after the rain." Beninka commented from the shadows, "You like spiders, huh?" Martina thought for a second. "It's not that so much. It's just that they keep laying webs all around me and lots of little baby nests. I was scared at first, but realized that they never hurt me. There are webs in the corners and the windows. I try to put the nests out of the way, because they put them in unsafe places sometimes. The spiders watch me all night and catch all kinds of bugs. Saved me from a few nasty ones, I think. One of them always seems like it recognizes me. Like it calls out to me. I'd saved one once. I think this is its great-great-grandkid or something." Ricky and Beninka both slowly nodded. Beninka spoke from the darkness. "Spider's pretty good. You'll be pretty strong and take care of a lot of people. Come back later and I'll have something for you. Now scram, we got she's to do." The girl smiled with a twinkle in her eye and took off with the bees. Beninka continued her thought and completed her idea. "Ricky, rustle up, sus. Rustle up some grub. Gonna grab something for the brat." Beninka took off over to her side. Ricky shrugged and went to bang on houses with his hammer to find some termites to have with their supper. The termite population had exploded when the people population started dropping off. The termites were helping bring the planet back to its normal neutral state. Ricky was working to collect the termites so they could keep their energy up. His stove he'd been using worked really well to crisp them up, along with the other goodies they'd been foraging. The rhubarb was a great sugar. There were potatoes for spring through fall. The little girl had brought them some various seeds they said should grow if everything in the ecology went okay. There were frogs everywhere, keeping the bugs down, and the trees started making apples and cherries like they were supposed to. Ricky had started bashing parts of the fence down and moving the saplings that he'd found to the area. He wasn't doing a very good job of making it into an actual legitimate garden, but he was doing his best. Ricky would watch the sun and figure out what needed sun and what didn't. He ran the water off all the houses into buckets and ended up ripping off gutters to make new irrigation. Again, it wasn't very good, but it was all he could do. Beninka had been rustling up jars so they could jar up the extra if Ricky could make any. Ricky was trying to make all the food he possibly could. He hoped the bees were going to do their thing and save everyone. In a few days, the little girl came back and said the group's leadership was thankful for the bees. She said they released a few and then handed the bees off to their friends in other areas to release them in tiny portions until they would be around most of the Pacific Northwest. Beninka presented Martina with a gift, which was some shirts Beninka had found with various spiderweb patterns on them. Martina absolutely loved the shirts, immediately put one over her shirt that she was currently wearing, and the rest went in her pack. The next time Martina came back, she had her little spiderweb patterns on her, 380 that Ricky had given her so many weeks earlier. Benika and Ricky were proud. Martina gave them more seeds from the stronghold nearby. Then off she went. Everything went pretty well for a few months, planting and growing and trying to scavenge and lock the place down. But like all good things, Chapter 21, that clicking noise. Several months later, late summer. Sleep time. Ricky and Benika were looking out over the new lake to the east, listening to the frogs. What started with feeling was slowly confirmed. Something didn't look right to the east. They couldn't see it during the day, only at night while they were asleep. Some all-consuming force. Something was calling the darkness here, or maybe pushing it. It was a similar feeling, but distant. Maybe something he had felt in that blasted bunker and tunnel. Whatever it was, it now wanted their fresh crops, and it was coming fast. Morning. Ricky and Benika woke up in a cold sweat, even though it was warm outside. They both walked for several miles to the lake, but nothing was across it that seemed malevolent. Neither could shake the feeling, though. They both held each other tight and watched for an hour to make sure, but nothing happened. They both remained jittery for the morning, though, and decided to do something about it. Both had bartered with the stronghold nearby for more ammo. Ricky had more birdshot than he knew what to do with, and Benika was full up on mags again with a few extra boxes. They'd also been able to finagle and haggle for some oil, so they could keep their firearms in tip-top condition with strict orders that they never use the firearms against the good guys. That agreement went without saying, of course. The duo finally figured out what the explosions had been so many months before. A roving group of two was on a personal vendetta to wipe out all the old druggy dens in the area. Apparently they'd run into another one in the past and decided this was going to be their new thing in between stronghold visits. The new state patrol that came through during Ricky's escape of the city had ran into the druggies and tipped off the two-girl army. When that op was done, they sold the drone to the nearby stronghold as they passed. The plan was to use the drone to scout on the other side of the lake. One of these days, for reasons unrelated to Ricky and Benika's growing concerns. Martina had been telling them all this and lately had been showing up with a new spider friend on her shoulder. Nobody else could see the spider, of course, but they could. Benika noticed it at first. "Hey, I dig the spider. What's her name?" "Well, she says her name was Ocha, so that's what I call her. Don't tell anyone, though." "It's fine. Your secret is safe with us, of course." The three looked at each other, all with critters on their shoulders. It was quiet for a minute, and Ricky asked, "Ever dream of this place before, like, out where we are?" Benika elbowed him in the ribs pretty hard. Ricky doubled over, trying to decide whether he should whimper or crack up. He couldn't make up his mind, so he did neither and tried to stand back up straight without wincing too much. Martina ignored Ricky's plight and thought about it for a second. "I never really thought about it before. Maybe I will tonight." They all nodded and went through the rest of their normal routine for the day with more dread that they tried their best to ignore. It wasn't long working in the gardens and scavenging before it was nightfall. Sleep time. Ricky and Benika held hands and stared across the gigantic lake again, frogs talking about something or the other. The burps and croaks were unintelligible to the duo. After a while they felt a third presence, and from the west a little girl skipped around, poking and prodding at random things as she traveled. "We'll put one here, and one there, and one here, and one there. Oh, hey, guys." Martina was there with her spider buddy, Ocha. Benika spoke first. "Hey." Benika nodded to the east. "What do you think about that?" Martina thought about it for a second and stared hard to the east, looking with far more senses than what her eyes afforded. "We don't like it. There needs to be lots more webs, that's for sure." Martina seemed to shudder as if witnessing something way stronger than her and unquantifiable. Ricky knew that the plural meant her and the spider, not the nearby camp, but it was a good segue into the topic anyway. Does your camp suspect anything, Martina? Well, intel suggests... She trailed off. They think something's up, but they don't know what. Only rumors, whispers. Ricky and Benika nodded. They all felt a low rumble, chitter-chatter. Something that was normally calm, peaceful, harmless, nomadic, independent, solitary. But it was getting pissed off. Very pissed off. If there was an imagined green hue before, it was turning to a dull brown, and it felt horrible. Ricky and Benika continued staring at it while Martina skipped off, pointing in even more spots. Here and here and here. We'll need lots, okay? Next morning. Martina brought some people with her the next morning through Ricky and Benika's area. They didn't say much, only nodded. There wasn't specifically mistrust, but it was more tense than it probably should have been. They were heavily armed, but did seem to relax a little bit once actually seeing Benika and Ricky face to face for the first time. They passed through several more miles to the lake and launched their drone. Ricky asked if he could watch, and they seemed to look down on him, but didn't say no. Ricky didn't mind being passively discounted. He was used to it. Benika stayed behind, as she didn't like them for several reasons. Ricky suspected, though, she wasn't very far off and was covering him. Nothing like the warm embrace of being covered by a sniper who cares deeply about your safety, after all. The drone launched and seemed to have really good range. It was some kind of custom drone hand-built by the drone girl that passed through months earlier. Ricky didn't know what they traded it for, but he suspected it was worth a decent amount. He also imagined every stronghold having one of these, and that it'd be a really great asset. It'd take a lot to cross this huge lake, even more to go around it. It'd be dangerous, and nobody could afford to even lose a single person at this point. The drone was significantly safer, plus everything could be recorded for rock-solid intel. The drone flew really far away, but the guys had a really strong base station they set up. He was using a ham band and had a heavy-duty battery and a rolling box. It had other things in the box, too, necessary for the drone's operation, but Ricky didn't want to seem too interested. The drone reached its maximum safest range as the alarm started going off. They'd have to review the footage later because it wasn't a model that could beam back footage. The alarm stopped going off, but they set the controls now. Ricky heard them talking about how it could automatically fly back to them, so that's probably what they were doing. About 20 minutes later, the drone came back and landed next to them. They picked it up and said they'd share the information if there was anything to report, and thanked Ricky for taking care of the area. He thanked them back, but they were already on their way. Martina seemed to be ignoring him, but he understood why. Once they were out of sight, Ricky went to go find Benika. He walked for 20 feet or so and couldn't hear her anywhere. Seconds later, she gracefully flipped out of a tree and landed on the ground. He smiled at her and she smacked him on the shoulder. They walked back quietly to the little fort they'd been making. There were some fruits and vegetables waiting for them on their park-style bench with a note. Don't forget to save the seeds. Thanks for everything. The note was unsigned. The food smelled great with rich and distinct aromas. Ricky and Benika ate the fresh fruits and vegetables and took the seeds and put them in a cut-up milk carton they'd found with some dirt. Ricky had found some heavy plastic sheet wrap and was going to make them a greenhouse so they could keep growing throughout the winter. Even babysitting the little seeds helped a lot to get them that much closer for the next spring. Also, he remembered it was about time to plant the fall harvest. Ricky was having a hard time thinking that far ahead, though, when it felt like something horrible was looming barely over the horizon. He tried to get some more gardening and scavenging done, but kept looking east. He felt something over there, something massive and noisy and horrible. Ricky looked down and there was a spider making a web. Ricky did his best to work around it. He felt like it smiled up at him, and he smiled back and then tried to keep working. Before long, it was dark and time to crawl inside the hidey hole. There was a rat somewhere complaining about a rolling empty bottle over a bucket of water, located west of their location. Ricky reminded them all to leave the west alone. because there's much bigger things to be concerned about. There were lots of new rats that were not as disciplined and that were still learning the way. Ricky did his best to convince them to form up along the south. Within a few hours, they reported that the black rats were forming along the north. Seemed like Benika had a similar idea. Night time. Ricky and Benika stood at the water's edge, staring into a brown and red abyss across the huge lake. Before long, Martina was in the background, hopping around, pointing at things. Here, and here, and here. She was nervous, but didn't know what else to do. She bounced around for the area for over an hour before calming down and hanging out at the lake with Ricky and Benika. For once she was quiet. It was quite a while before she spoke. I heard the people in the town talking where they thought I couldn't hear. She paused for a while and she didn't want to say the next words. They said the ground was moving and that the vegetation in the distance was all gone. Nobody said anything for a while, then she continued. Guys, should we be worried? You two are gonna stay, aren't you? You said you'd help with the bugs. Benika didn't know what to say, and finally Ricky spoke. Well, I worked hard on this place, and I'm tired of everything trying to force me out of where I want to live. That seemed to hit a nerve with Benika, who had obviously tried to force him out of his sewer home years earlier before the flood finally did the job that she couldn't. Benika winked out without a word and left Ricky standing there with Martina. Martina grabbed Ricky's hand. You aren't leaving, are you? Ricky steeled himself. No way. They stood there together and waited for the sunlight. Chapter 22. The Ugly Truth. Next morning. Ricky woke up and Benika was gone. He couldn't sense her or the black rats anywhere. It was lamentable, but not regrettable. The truth was the truth, and sometimes it was painful. He lost before, and grief was only an old friend. Ricky got up and looked at his chamomile and lavender, taking some of the extra pieces off the plants carefully and stuffing them in his pockets. Away he went to the south, to a perimeter his brown rats had set up. They were chattering non-stop all morning about new crunchy green insects, and quite the decent number, where Ricky's rat population was in the low thousands before. They had been quite content and expanded into the tens of thousands. Ricky'd never seen a locust swarm up close, but he'd heard about it on the Nature Channel way back when. They were fairly unstoppable, but he was willing to give it a chance. His little rat buddies could eat damn near anything, and Ricky didn't want to think about it if he'd finally saved up all the crops only to have these insects eat all the crops that were fairly finely producing properly. To get to the front line, Ricky had to walk by bees happily buzzing, fixing the plants. It made him smile. Then he'd walk by mosquitoes in their little swarm bubbles, the good ones making sure the bad ones stopped spreading diseases. The mosquitoes and their eggs transmitting the cures on top of that for both waterborne and bloodborne disease and parasites. Out towards the edge he found functioning apple trees and pear trees, and he loaded up his bag. The cherry trees had already got picked clean by the birds, which Ricky thought was fine. The tiny flying chickens had to eat also. Eventually there'd be enough cherry trees to where the birds couldn't eat them all. Then they could share. Then maybe Ricky could get some blueberries also. The thought made Ricky laugh. He'd have to wait until winter probably, dig up his own and take it back and put nets on it. Birds could eat a lot of blueberries, Ricky imagined. With that, Ricky arrived to the front lines. The rats were everywhere, munching on what could have only been the edge of their numbers. The locusts' numbers. He felt the wind gently push towards him, and in the far distance saw a huge ball, 20 stories high, roll what was probably about 100 yards back and then flump down. Already he could hear the munching, gnawing, and scratching of their legs together and the flapping of their undersized wings. Ricky called all the rats that he could to him that might have been lingering. He had to meet up with them when they hit the ground, otherwise the locusts would jump right over them, and he wouldn't even get a chance to do damage to them. More rats came to his aid. He had a higher percentage of total number now, but still not all of them. The wind gusted heavier this time, and a huge ball of locusts lunged another 100 yards towards him. It still wasn't enough to where he could see them individually. It looked like a giant organic dust cloud leaping across the area towards him. He'd recalled the river being there somewhere. That was the outlet to this new lake, but they must have easily hopped it. Ricky got a text in between giant leaps of the bug ball. "Good luck. Hope to see you again." He read it and wasn't quite sure what to say, so he messaged her back all he could think of. "Good lucky to you as well. Hope to see you soon." Then he pressed send, and then he reread it and realized he said some of the words wrong. It cracked him up, though, because it sort of worked anyway, and he chuckled. Seconds later, he got a winky face, which made him warm inside. The wind kicked up, and the bug ball bounded another 100 yards at him. It was much bigger this time, not only because it was closer, but because it was terrifying. The wayward locusts, which in turn started running with the herd. They would run until they found food and then stop trying to eat each other to quickly eat all the food. As soon as the wind would gust in the air, they would all hop. All terrified, the one behind them would eat them from behind. All of them searching for the next bit of food, so hopefully they'd all stop biting each other in the bug butt. Ricky thought about it for a bit and realized he needed a way for his rats to stay together so they wouldn't get separated and devoured by the exponentially increasing horde of upset bugs. He remembered back when he had to untangle the rats when their tails would get knotted up. That gave him an idea. Ricky tried to calculate exactly where the locusts would land, and moved his little friends into position with his favorite rat song. "Rats, rats, everywhere you see." He felt some of them look his way, and then he started marching forward. "Rats, rats, everywhere you turn." Ricky felt some of the lingering on the outskirts turn his way. "Rats, rats, eating all your stuff." He felt the excitement of the rats hearing their favorite song. "Rats, rats, living in your undies." He felt the excitement and pride of the brown rat horde, and they all surged forward as a solid line. "There must be a couple thousand coming your way." A huge bug ball, 100 feet high, lurched forward with a big wind blast. Ricky hoped he had calculated it properly with all things considered. At this point, if the next wind gust was a big one, the locusts would land right on top of them. Ricky hoped this is what he actually wanted. "Soon there will be 1,000,000. How will you make us go away?" With that, Ricky told the rats to all dip and duck under each other, and within moments they were all tied up in a giant mess called Rat Kings. It freaked the rats out a little, but Ricky promised he would untie them all once it was all over. He knew his rats would never run from a battle, but they would get disoriented because it would be hard to see. They could protect each other this way. It was their best chance at survival, especially since many of them had never been in a big turf war before. Ricky guessed it was only moments for the next gust of wind, and he heard something in the giant lake next to him. It was croaking, more croaking and burping than usual. The frogs were going nuts. It was almost deafening, and Ricky was taken aback. He didn't know what to do. It stunned him, and all he heard echoing in his brain was the urge to move out a bit from the lake. He felt like he had to, like he was being compelled to, but in a good way, not a bad way. In the final moments, as the biggest wind gust yet blew, he moved his rats out away from the lake, a little bit to form a 45-degree wedge against the lake. The wind had been blowing hard for a moment. Ricky barely had any time to look up in the air as the locusts were already airborne. he lifted his shotgun and started blasting holes in the cloud. Once he estimated they were within 100 yards. The birdshot he loaded from trading with the group nearby his base putting in good work. Ricky guessed that he was taking maybe 30 or 40 out per blasts, but there was easily 1,000,000, if his moderate estimates were correct. As the Locusts were doing their version of flying at Ricky, he quickly loaded some of the other random rounds, making sure to leave out slugs for the time being. A few of the rounds launched into the air were delayed for a few seconds and then exploded, taking out several balls of the creatures that flew at him. As they descended, Ricky shot up a few rounds that ended up being magnesium rounds again, and the acrid smell of crispy, toxic locusts filled the air. The next minute was a torrent of locusts landing on Ricky, buffeting him so hard that he was taken to his knees. He swung out into the air with his pickaxe, vertically trying to swat them as they landed, using his other hand to guard his eyes. In about a minute, they'd all landed and were munching on everything in sight. Ricky zipped up his coat tight and popped the collar, trying to protect himself, and started swinging and stomping. The rats were all in a frenzy, fighting for their lives. The locusts were eating the rats and became more afraid of them than each other. At least this way he could stop them from springing forward again, but at what cost? The rats seemed to be holding their own, with each rat eating as many as 10 locusts. The rat kings were doing very well, able to cover each other if the locusts got on their vulnerable backs. The crunching and gnawing and screaming between the rats and locusts hurt Ricky's ears, and after about 10 minutes of fighting, he couldn't tell if he was deaf, or if everything always sounded this way. He fought forward, trying to find an end to this swarm. Every step was a battle between the locusts in his face, on his gloved hands, and trying to get in every nook and cranny to bite him. Ricky was in the center of the bug cloud, but he had to push forward to get out. Step by step, he made it out of the center and headed to where he thought the driving force between the diseased locusts was. Ricky hazarded a turn around to see behind him, and through the thick thought he saw flames. Apparently the nearby stronghold had afforded some troops with improvised flamethrowers to try to hold off the edge. Ricky tried to yell and wave them to circle around, but he wasn't sure if they would understand. Ricky looked down and saw tons of spiderwebs on the ground and spiders cocooning up the oversized evil crickets and grasshoppers as fast as they could. Ricky grinned to himself. It seemed as if Martina had been here prior with Ocha, setting up spider traps. Ricky carefully stepped around them to let them do their work as he forged forward. He walked a ways, turned around again, and couldn't see or hear anyone. He heard less and less screams and reports from his rats and feared the worst. Ricky reloaded his shotgun with the last of his ammo and forged forward. Whatever was causing this disaster would pay for what this nature imbalance, or Ricky would perish trying. Walking became easier step by step, crunch by crunch, swing by swing. There were still locusts everywhere, though, and they seemed to be ready to go at a moment's notice once the wind picked up. Ricky looked around and didn't see anyone, and decided to circle around and see if he'd missed someone on the land side, since they weren't straight back behind the insect mob. Every step he heard less and less of his rats calling out their little war cries, and it was making him lose hope. That's when he saw a man. This wasn't just any man. He had some kind of tethered red beast behind him. The flat, bloated slop would raise a hand, and the guy would echo the motion. Ricky raised a shotgun, knowing with every sense of his being that this was the issue. The red beast, then the man, raised some sort of weapon and motioned it at Ricky. Ricky's shots fell short of their target, instead slamming into insects that suddenly blocked the way. Ricky moved and fired, emptying the rest of his magazine tube. Every shot hit clumps of the giant grasshoppers that were suddenly there. Ricky looked at them up close once he spent his last round, each bug nearly the size of a mouse. Ricky couldn't really think of what to do, so he did the only thing he could think of. "Hey, jerk, what are you doing here?" The guy looked at him in slow motion like, "What did I do?" His mouth somewhat slack-jawed. Ricky yelled at him, "Not you, you weak excuse for a human. That red slobby piece of garbage behind you." As Ricky taunted him, he circled around the guy so he could size him up. The guy was weak and pathetic, but had some kind of weird gun that controlled the locusts. Ricky sensed a great level of fear and panic from the object. Ricky didn't know what he was going to do, but it was probably going to suck. Ricky had learned a long time ago to embrace the suck, as so many military people had as their mantra. Ricky pointed at the red monster. "You aren't supposed to be here." That finally got its attention, and the guy stopped waving his electronic tool around that he had. The beast started speaking, though nothing came out of its mouth. The man echoed the mouth movements, and a deep, evil voice came out. "I get that a lot. Get out of my way." "Not on your life, you diseased pig." That gave Ricky an idea. "If you want to claim this place, you have to come through me, because so far from what I can tell, it's mine." "Not for long, pathetic rat." Ricky felt back to his little buddies and could barely feel any left. The grim realization swelled in intense camaraderie, respect, fear, and rage at the same time. He raised his pickaxe and charged at the man-demon as fast as his little legs could go. A whole second wave of locusts began raising up behind the man-demon as winds picked up and he started cackling maniacally. "So many have tried, all gone, only me." Then as Ricky began to close the distance, a shot rang out. It barely fell short, kicking gravel onto the man. Many pieces of shrapnel lodged in the possessed businessman, but he didn't seem to notice. Ricky didn't stumble and kept going. As he got closer, he saw the guy was in a ripped and torn business suit and looked horrible, but Ricky didn't feel sorry and yelled as he ran full steam ahead. The man-demon turned to face the new threat as Ricky felt the rifle in the distance raise half a millimeter. The follow-up shot which came a second later slammed into bugs that the man-demon had feared up into the projectile's path. It slammed into 20 or 30 until it veered off course, barely missing the shell of a man. As the bullet whizzed by the empty shell's face, he grinned off into the distance and then remembered Ricky was there at the same time. "Nice trick. She made you believe she wouldn't be here to fool me." Mortimer dove off Ricky's shoulder and slammed into the red tub of crap, biting into his throat. Ricky slashed with his hog hammer, but missed his mark as the guy suddenly regained some control over his body. Not realizing its importance, he instinctively put up his hand to guard from the melee attack and was rewarded with the machine in it being damaged. The demon gasped as Mortimer stopped wasting his time with the monster's throat and went for its eye. He wiggled his little arms around trying to stop the attack but couldn't. He yelled for a shell to help him, but the guy's eyes went wide with horror. Ricky bonked him hard with the blunt end of the hog hammer. Mortimer was going to town on one eye and was about to go to the other eyes. The red demon thrashed violently, then vanished. The shell laid on the ground, mumbling and moaning as Ricky backed away from him, unsure what to do. Seconds later, the locusts focused their attention on his defenseless body and had portions of him down to bone in mere moments. Ricky scooted away on his butt with his legs and got up before they decided he was meal-worthy again. Ricky started to walk away to try to address the larger locust problem when another shot rang out, and Ricky flinched for the first time, hearing that rifle fire. Was it finally his time? Was this Panika's way of ending their relationship and taking his turf as their own? When Ricky realized a split second later that he was still conscious and standing, he turned around. At his feet was the headless corpse of the businessman, far closer to Ricky than he was moments earlier. A trail of the locusts strewn 20 feet from where Ricky had left his partially devoured body seconds earlier. Ricky waved off into the distance with a silly grin on his face, feeling the magnification of a scope on him. His pocket buzzed and he picked up the phone. It simply had a winky face. This put a little hop in his step as Ricky grabbed the busted device and ran to the far edge of the locusts. Benika's black rats stormed into the vulnerable set of the locusts, devouring them by the thousands. When Ricky got to the edge of the carnivorous and cannibalistic brown locusts and back into the green, more docile ones, he started fiddling with the machine he found. He felt Mortimer on his shoulder, quite pleased with himself, as if he was super proud for messing up such a horrible monster many times his size. Ricky was proud of him also. They were a perfect team. Ricky focused on the machine and tried to figure it out. He was pretty bad with electronics. He held some of the pieces together that looked like they came apart and pressed the button. It didn't work at first, but a couple of tries and all the locusts lurched away from him a bit. Ricky got into a better position and cranked the knob up to full power, and all the remaining locusts jumped right into the lake without even time to think about what was happening. Ricky was in awe as to how many there still were. It was horrifying. Not as horrifying as what the locusts were going through, though. Thousands of frogs were waiting with their mouths open on the lake. The frogs ate for several hours and became very fat frogs. Before anyone could come, Ricky took the machine and threw it into the lake as far as it would go, then headed home. The devastation was horrible. Nearly 80% of his rats were gone. Locust parts were everywhere, where the rats had stopped eating them and chomped and moved on. The birds were already down to earth, cleaning up everything that looked like an easy snack to their respective subspecies. Ricky thought it would have been nice to have their help earlier, but most of them were tiny bug eaters and usually only preferred fruits and seeds. He didn't mind. It was usually rats who did the heavy lifting anyway. Ricky decided to stay and help his rats out on the spot. He sat by the lake and made sure none of the locusts somehow got back out, or that the ones Panika was shoving this way didn't get too far. Ricky got all of his rats untied in time for Panika to shove the second group towards him, and he angled them into the water with her help and the help of his remaining rat forces. They held them at the waterline for hours as all the frogs in the area conglomerated for a feeding frenzy that would have made piranhas or sharks jealous. Ricky finished untying all the rats from their Rat King formations, and they all dispersed to see what there was to do. Before long they reported that the black rats were coming, which they had grown fond of and were happy to see. When they all came in, Ricky raised a curious eyebrow as he noticed one of the young ratlings was brown with black spots. He'd never seen one like it before, and he put his hand out to see if it was real, and it loved his hand up and then took off down the beach. Off in the distance he saw the flamethrowers going of the neighbors cleaning up the edge of the locusts. Every few minutes another Rat King would come, and he'd untangle them, and off they'd go in separate directions. They were thankful for the safety they provided each other, but were happy to be free. Not as many came back as he wanted, but at least some were left. Enough to start over. The sun started to go low in the sky, and Benika finally found him and sat down. Neither saying anything, the wind finally calmed. As the sun began to set, Benika quietly and solemnly grabbed Ricky's hand, and they went back to their little hidey spot together. All the remaining rats followed in tow to the near-deafening echo chamber of happy frogs. Around Benika and Ricky's feet, spiders clamored around the webbing, up any locusts who tried to think they could have somehow survived the epic battle for later spider chow. Sleep time. Ricky and Benika stood at the edge of the giant lake. A biomass of frogs were still catching and eating locusts. As it turns out, the locusts can walk on water and even swim. The rats and spiders encircled the lake, though, and ate any who tried to get out. After a little while, Martina skipped over and gave them both big hugs. The town is very happy, and thanks you both. We did a really good job today, didn't we? Benika tousled her hair in response. You did really good, kid. We're both proud of you. A fourth person silently walked up to them along the water's edge. His presence was foreign, but somehow also very familiar, like he'd been there the whole time, but they hadn't specifically noticed him. The frog is very happy and proud to have such good friends on the land. The three of them nodded at each other, and he came over to stand with them, staring into the lake and beyond. They were all quiet for a while, then he spoke again. This lake, it was not here before. It's pretty cool. I like it. They all agreed with him and hung out at the lake all night long together. Everyone too exhausted to even talk, except for Martina, who kept getting up to point out more spots for spider webs and nests. She kept cracking everyone up as her youthful energy was so much fun to watch. Chapter 23. Everyone's happy. Back in the rat base. The coming weeks. After the epic four-way battle, peace stretched across the land. The bulk of the locusts were held in the lake, as the frogs continued eating them for days. Only a few got out, and returned to the normal balance of them being green, solitary, and peaceful. They'd come together every few weeks for their brief ritual, and would immediately separate again. The other creatures were plenty able to keep them at their normal numbers, like how it's supposed to go. Ricky and Beninka returned to let the CDC know that everything went okay, and eventually they came out and reacclimated with what was left of society. Some mechanics and engineers from Puyallup came up with the new state patrol and helped reconnect the building to the power grid. The CDC kept on doing research like nothing had ever happened, and the nearby stronghold brought the nearby fresh food periodically. The nearby CDC base. The two communities ended up commingling. Some prior families were reunited, and several new happy families sprung out of the situation, which was a win-win for everybody. The rat population stretched out and calmed down and ended up not bugging anyone, although occasionally one would stray too close to the stronghold and get lost. Ricky kept telling them, but it was fairly useless on things like that. Occasionally a drone would fly overhead, and Ricky would wave at it. Beninka would smack him playfully whenever he did it. Ricky and Beninka stayed together. Beninka continues playfully beating Ricky, but he doesn't mind. Sometimes he would try to defend himself, but it never ended well, and he'd always lose. They enjoyed each other's company a lot and were inseparable. They even got to plant pumpkins, which was very exciting because Ricky loved pumpkin bread. It wasn't too long before Martina ended up moving out and finding her own house to stay in nearby. Nobody ever went near it because it was chock full of spiders. Martina seemed to like it that way. Sometimes when they were asleep, all at the same time, their mysterious frog friend would pay the trio a visit. They loved to stand by the new lake and listen to the happy croaking and burping of the frogs together. Chapter 24. Epilogue. Back in class. Stronghold. Early summer. So, yay, everyone, what'd you think? One of the little girls yelled at me. That was gross. I shrugged and said sheepishly, yeah, sorry. I thought you all wanted a story about this. I forgot. What was the original question anyway? Rats, right? Yeah, but spiders and frogs are gross. Another kid, a girl, held up a frog and waggled it at her. Its helpless legs dangled there and it burped at her, so she put it back away. I adjusted myself in my teaching chair uncomfortably. Yeah, you should probably put that back. Not all of them are okay to grab. Another kid was pointing at a spider in the room. Is that one of Martina's spiders? I responded thoughtfully. No, Martina is quite a bit north of here. The stronghold near them is a different one. I don't know if all of our strongholds have names, so I don't know what to call it. Another asked if the red monster was gone. I thought for a second and tried to figure out how to word it. Unfortunately, he isn't really gone. We thought he was gone the last time and ended up popping back up. I thought for a second, trying to decide how much to tell. None of them are ever really gone, but if he comes back, or if any of his friends ever come back, there's quite a few of us now that can take care of him. I thought to myself that didn't work either, as I was getting a lot of blank stares. He's far away. Let's put it that way. They all nodded. That seemed to work. One of the kids made a statement, then asked, "So rats aren't really dangerous?" I shrugged. I mean, they can be. Any critter, if they gets to be too many of them, can be dangerous. We have great counter disease center working to make sure all the animals are safe from bad viruses. I think we'll be a-okay, but please ask your parents before you take a wild animal home with you. A few of them looked at me guiltily. None of you will be in trouble, but please be careful. Pets are an important responsibility. But none of them really said anything, so I continued before the parents started picking up the kids. Animals are great, and every single one is important, so you have to respect them. Especially the orangish red chicken. It's cute, but don't try to grab it. I paused for a second, trying to remember if anything else was important. Oh yeah, and also don't do drugs. If you see any needles on the ground, don't touch them, and tell an adult. One of the kids asked about hypothetically finding various plants and smoking them. Ask your parents about smoking if for some reason you want to. You're probably all too young to be thinking about that. Plus, you aren't supposed to be playing with fire, are you? They all shook their heads. I thought to myself as the parents picked up the kids, ooh, sure dodged a bullet on that one. I don't care if they smoke weed when they get older, but gotta make sure there isn't anything harder or synthetic going around. Hopefully there aren't any more nests of those psychos. Intel finally says we got them all. Last of the parents got their kids, and I only got a few dirty looks this time. I looked up at them and smiled and shrugged. When the last children left, I closed up my classroom and in the farmhouse and went to my tiny house. It was a warm evening, but cool inside. My cat was happy to see me, but had a wild look in her eyes like she'd been dealing with keeping a rodent shoot out all day. She grabbed my arm and clamped down and wouldn't let go, leaving several piercings in my arm and hand. I put some alcohol soap on my wounds, and she seemed satisfied that she'd done enough damage and flopped down on the bed, cranking at me. I checked her food and water, and it was fine like always. I think she'd been using her cat food as a trap to try to get mice in or something. I checked all the corners, and cinder blocks filled with rebar and gravel were all solid as a giant stone wall could be. It was cooling down outside, but it could have been 100 out there, and I still wouldn't have felt it in here. It made going to sleep so much easier. When I finally did dream, it started with something very simple. A man, a stick, a giant earthquake, and a massive divided region. Massive divided region, fighting for its identity. Alright, that is the end of book 12. I hope you guys enjoyed it.